Hello friends. Welcome to the Fiction Quest. How are you all? So in this video, we will see what if Naruto awakened destruction power in the world of One Piece. But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, if possible, share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. Burn my body and scatter the ashes. Is this all? Is this all that is left? Though we once kept the secrets of our villages, of our ancestors, of our world. Everything's gone. Everyone's gone. Better we lose what we have left than rebuild hell on earth. Out of hundreds of millions, the survivors amount to these people? We will not let this happen. Let it die with us. This cruel legacy of blood sacrifice and torture. Just because it was not your personal action, does not mean you are not responsible in this matter. We were all soldiers in this war. We cursed those people in order to add to our arsenal. It's fitting that the karma came back to us in such a brutal fashion. We will never create another Jinchuriki. We will never let the process be discovered. You gotta admit that it's pretty ironic. Especially, the madness. Even if you're strong enough to survive everything else, the madness may still get you and one of the others will put you down like a rabid dog. Hey, can we say that we don't deserve it? We will not hide the horror of their creation. The monstrous mistake of humanity that destroyed everything. Can't blame them, blame the bastards that started this, bringing the gods in the wars of men. This is our oath, our promise that God was not mistaken to spare us, that we still have the right to live. There are others. Scattered around. We'll probably run into them. The message will get passed on. We are in agreement then? Live your life as you will, just stay away from groups like that. They could find out, they always have the facilities. The bottom line is irrevocable, your own personal hunter nin, as long as it gets done, you could make some allies, if only you knew where you'd end up, who you'd end up with. When I die, burn my body. Burn my body and scatter the ashes, don't leave so much as a lock of hair. The only thing I will ask of you. The only thing I need done for me. Do this as my friend, as my ally, my nakama. Burn my body and scatter the ashes, help me keep my oath. Dawn Island was a small to medium-sized island located in the weakest of the seas. East Blue. It was a small non-assuming place with nothing particularly interesting about it. Large enough for a couple of respectably sized villages and a good amount of fields for farming. They exported most of what they grew in crops, generally to the Marines, and managed to maintain a respectable fishing industry appropriate for an island of that size. Of course, any fishing boats operated on the opposite side of the island from Lord of the Coast. The existence of the mountain was probably the most notable feature that any visitors would deem to mention, and it was pretty boring anyway. It was well known to all of the residents of Dawn Island that the only people who willingly spent time there was a group of bandits, who crossed swords with some pirates and met a particularly sticky end, and a boy with the name, Portgas. This was not because it was particularly dangerous now, just really boring and not really worth your time. If you were to ask anyone on Dawn Island, the only interesting visitors fell into two groups. One of those was Garp along with his subordinates, and the other was the members of an up-and-coming pirate crew led by a cheerful man with red hair. So, you see, Dawn Island was a boring place to be. It really was no surprise that most people left for the Marines, pirates, revolutionaries, or whatever would get them out to see the world. If this was a fact of the entire island, then you can be sure that this was true for Fuchsia Village, which was dull, sleepy and boring just like everything else. The people of the island were a pretty cheerful and easygoing folk. Let's be honest now, you had to put up with Garp and his family on a semi-regular basis. It's no surprise that they ended up getting on so well with red-haired Shanks and his crew. There was a rather unpleasant confrontation when they first made port though. It involved Makino, the business end of a mop, and Shanks. More than 10 years later, and Shanks refuses to speak of the incident, and Ben merely laughs as if to say, "We're pirates. How did you think she'd react?" It happened one day, after an unusually wild storm, that someone interesting did come to the island. He washed up by the dock and was spotted by Gyoru and one of the fishermen, who quickly pulled him out of the water. Being sensible and practical men, they quickly tried to get help, even though it was perfectly clear to any normal human that what they had was a certain candidate for John Doe grave. Makino finished wiping down the tables before pausing. It was at times like this that she really missed Luffy, She was happy for him, of course. He was out at sea, pursuing his dream. Luffy wouldn't be, well, Luffy if he didn't do that. But Ace-kun was long gone and Luffy-kun had followed his own path. Garp hadn't visited since then, and it had been years since Shanks and his crew had docked here. In all honesty, she mused to herself, that was probably when they'd had the most visitors to Party's bar. Everyone else who came was from the island. "It's so quiet now," she murmured, and then, as if to punctuate her statement, a baying mob crashed through the door. She was hovering, she knew that. But the man that they had dragged out of the bay, he was dying. She had seen gory wounds before, people having accidents with farming equipment, Shanks and his arm, Luffy and well, everything until he ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi. But this was utterly brutal. She could tell by the expression on the doctor's face that he agreed with the assumption of Gyoru and Heisuke who had first found him. It wasn't a race to save a life, it was an act of compassion and mercy, dulling the pain of a dying man. Nevertheless, the doctor had bandaged and stitched all that he could while Makino lent an extra pair of hands. He gave the gray-haired stranger a shot of potent painkiller before returning to the main part of the bar to decide what to do. Gyoru was still there, retelling the story for the umpteenth time. "He's a very tall man. Fit-looking too. He must have been in some sort of battle." "Do you think he could be a marine or a pirate?" one of the older men cut in. Gyoru rocked back in his seat and hummed. His clothes, what remains of them, were dark navy. Marines are always clad in white. So he must be a pirate. Despite how strong he looks, he must be pretty weak to end up in a terrible state. "Not like our Luffy. A world-famous pirate from our own village," someone else interjected. Everyone else laughed and cheered. Pirates took their chances. To become a pirate was basically saying that they were willing to endure injuries and inflict them upon others. Civilians didn't tend to have much sympathy for faceless soldiers in the war upon the sea. The doctor set his bag down on the bar counter. The bar room was ridiculously full for this time of day, almost as if everyone had dropped everything and run to the source of the excitement, which was a testament to the sort of place that Fuchsia was. He was bombarded with questions and he ignored them all, taking a seat by the mayor while he waited on Makino to bring him a cup of tea. He smiled, thanking her when she placed a cup in front of him, and proceeded to calmly sup and eat a couple of the biscuits that Makino had provided. "That man," he began, "has been through war. His wounds are fatal and far beyond my skills, but..." He sighed and took another drink. "He has scars. Marks from knives, blunt objects, burns. Every kind of wound you could possibly receive in battle. Those wounds were healed remarkably well, but this is far beyond the scope of an ordinary human." "Ha!" The mayor slammed his cane down on the ground. "Another thrice damned pirate then. Throw him back in the water or call the Marines. We don't need that kind of trouble here." "Do we know that?" Whoop turned to look at Makino's expression. "How do we know that he's a pirate? Many countries have their own militia. He could be a mercenary, or just a sailor on a merchant vessel." She sighed and her face took on a dark cast. "What kind of people would leave a man to die in the gutter? We're better than that here." The assembled crowd mumbled agreements and comments. Makino was right, she usually was. The doctor set his cup down with a smart tap. "It's irrelevant anyway. This man is dying. If it was just the burns and cuts, he'd probably be fine. But the left side of his body is mostly crushed, and someone..." He shuddered in disgust. "Cut out his left eye and made a damn messy job of it too. If his injuries don't get him, then the shock probably will." Gyoru stood up. "Well then, it's clear what we're going to do. We'll bury the poor soul when he passes on. Whatever he did with his life, it's nearing an end now, at least it'll be somewhat comfortable." Heisuke, the fisherman who had helped carry the stranger to the bar, played with his tankard. "What if he survives? What do we do then? If he is a pirate, he could be dangerous. Not all pirates are like Shanks and his crew." "We'll deal with that if it comes to pass," Makino interjected smoothly. "He can stay in that room for now. Everyone can keep an eye on him and ensure some peace of mind." That settled, the bar began to clear with various people offering clothes, food and bandages. No sense to burden Makino. She had taken care of the brothers, but that was different, they were family. Since the gray-haired man had washed up in Fuchsia Village, things had been, well, interesting. The mayor scrutinized the paper closely for any detail that might hint at an origin story. The aging Dr. Cairn wrote and called any and all associates for opinions, ideas and advice regarding the young mon's treatment. Makino kept a close eye on him, but he showed no sign of waking. In fact, he showed no change whatsoever, improvement or deterioration, which worried her more than she let on. What if he stayed in a coma? She wasn't equipped to deal with that and certainly had no obligation to do so. There was a fine line between human decency and gullible stupidity, one that Makino had always stayed the right side of. After a week or so, a routine had been established. The doctor would visit every day and do whatever he deemed necessary. Makino would keep an eye on the still man until one of the other villagers called in to help by watching him for a few hours. The mayor, for all of his griping, would spend most of the morning and afternoon reading his paper there so that Makino was free to get on with her work. There was a faint pang of guilt, as if they were abandoning a vulnerable individual, but everyone began to think about sending him to a specialized hospice on a larger island that took care of former sailors and coma patients. So naturally, with Sod's law prevailing, it was unsurprising that at this point that he quite abruptly woke up. Makino made her way upstairs to the stranger's room. The slight movement of his chest was the only indication that he was still alive. He was covered in bandages and the left side of his body was framed with some heavy casts. Dr. Cairn theorized that he was clipped with a cannonball to receive such injuries. She huffed and hefted her basket higher. Well, the fact that he's still alive is a miracle in itself. But the doctor says that his body can't take much more stress. It'll shut itself down soon enough. She set her laundry down on a chair. Still, it seems cruel that he survived so much only to fall when all is said and done. The room was unbearably stuffy, not that Mr. Gray-haired Cyclops cared. Makino doubted it was altogether healthy though, so, balancing with one knee on the bed, she leaned over his still form and opened the window. A gentle breeze ruffled the curtains and the familiar smell of salt water drafted through the chamber. She turned to leave when he shot up with a cry of surprise. Makino did the sensible thing and shrieked herself. The man tried to leap up and promptly collapsed back onto the bed, crying out in pain, his breath coming in painful gasps. Makino rushed over and quickly forced him to lie down. "Calm down. It's all right. You're perfectly safe here." She struggled to restrain him, marveling at how much strength he had left in his body. He wheezed and coughed. "Where am I? Who are you? What's going on?" "My name is Makino. You're on Dawn Island in the East Blue. Some of the locals pulled you out of the sea. Are you a pirate?" The man gasped and shuddered, his good hand clawing at his chest. Makino was terrified. Was he having a heart attack? He seemed faintly delirious, his one eye rolling and his body spasming while he hacked and coughed, struggling to breathe. She faintly heard the bell ringing in the background, indicating that someone had entered the bar. She stood up intending to summon help when he grabbed her wrist and roughly pulled her to him. "Burn my body and scatter the ashes." She blinked. "He just wants my full attention. At least he isn't violent." "Who are you?" She murmured. "My name is Kakashi." He rasped. "Makino-san, I beg of you. Do this for me. When I die, burn my body and scatter the ashes." Makino pushed against him. "Kakashi-san, be reasonable. The doctor will be here soon and you can talk to him. Don't ask for death." "No," he roared. "I don't care. Do what you want, but promise me this. Burn my body and scatter the ashes." He released her hand and bent over, coughing harshly and wincing with each movement. It's all right. I promise, okay. If you die, I'll see it done." Makino was unnerved by the way his one visible eye bored into her. She thought he was delirious and he was staring at her in such a way, begging with such fervent intensity. His mouth twitched in a parody of a smile before he hacked up some blood and other fluids. Seemingly satisfied, he relaxed and passed out, falling forward onto her shoulder. Looking back, everything was pretty confused. Their entire exchange had taken less than a minute, but it seemed like so much longer to her. She vaguely recalled the mayor and doctor bursting into the room, having heard the yelling and the misunderstanding that followed. He was passed out on her shoulder and had coughed blood and other stuff all over her dress. When she had changed, the nameless, no, Kakashi-san had been examined by Dr. Cairn and she had fixed 3 strong drinks. They sat at the bar and discussed it all. Why ask for that? Why not save me, or help me? Cairn wondered. HMMMPH, groused the mayor. Pirates aren't afraid of death. He probably realizes that we'll turn him over to the Marines. Makino-chan, did he say anything else? She stared at her drink. No, he was most insistent. It seemed very important to him. He wouldn't let up until I promised. Is it a religious thing? Cairn slouched and furrowed his brow. Possibly, we'll have to ask him. They both eyed the mayor, their question silent. He sighed and banged his empty tankard on the table. If he dies. Why not? He'd be dead, so what does it matter? Otherwise he'd be taking up room in our graveyard. If Kakashi-san dies, we'll honor his wish. It seems harmless enough anyway. We'll burn his body and scatter the ashes. Makino gave him a refill, digesting all of this excitement, and recalled the intense gaze of Kakashi. She'd admit this much. It had been the most excitement since they received the latest bounty poster for Luffy. The town was bustling and prosperous. Strange really, seeing as how pirates accepted a comparatively warm welcome here. The locals did business with the pirates and only got snippy when someone stood in the way of that. For that reason, weak and stupid crews were in as much danger from the local traders as the more powerful crews. Fights happened frequently enough. The only problem was when there was no one left to pay for the damage at the end of the night. There was a part of the town more suited for the wilder antics of pirates and a commercial district where they were welcomed as long as they were there to do business. For the most part, everyone accepted these rules. Even pirates need to stock their ship, and with so many ships passing through, if you decided to pillage and burn, you'd have to deal with the wrath of every other pirate that went to resupply at this port. And since no one wanted to pick a fight with Whitebeard, who was fond of the local liquor, things seemed to work quite well. As it was, the infamous Whitebeard pirates had stopped off here to pick up food, booze, tools, booze, equipment, and some more of that booze that the captain liked. They had been docked there for about a week and would be shoving off later that day. As was tradition for Ace, and a source of great hilarity for his nakama, he had found a restaurant and begun to eat them out of house and home. He usually fell asleep midway through one of his courses, but he was safe enough, particularly with that symbol upon his back. Either way, it always ended the same way, with Ace running back to the ship while utilizing his patented dine-in-dash technique. Ace was barely into his first course and was accompanied by Thatch and Teach. The restaurant staff had yet to suspect anything, so Ace was probably going to make the most of this place before they left. All of his duties were taken care of, and Marco didn't particularly feel like watching Ace and Teach stuff their gullets. If he wanted to see that, he'd just go to the galley any day of the week. He slouched off to explore a bit more of the town before the evening. Busy place, he commented. The marketplace was packed with people. He didn't have too much trouble working his way through the crowds. One of the advantages of an association with Whitebeard, he thought. People seemed to glance at his tattoo and give him a subtle berth. Close enough to pretend that they hadn't noticed a member of one of the most notorious pirate crews on the Grand Line, and far enough to avoid bumping into him and causing a possible scene. They wanted his business, but not any trouble. The weaponry on display could be categorized as either a tool or a trinket. The merchants catered to the more serious connoisseurs, along with those who barely knew which end of the blade to hold. Marco looked at the beautifully decorated but ultimately worthless swords, the ugly but deadly blades sharpened to a deadly edge. He moved towards the entry of a foundry where one of the apprentices was talking to a customer. The boy had a weapon wrapped in bandages on his back and a dull, serious expression. Marco peered at a large four-bladed axe on display and half-heartedly eavesdropped. Surprisingly enough, despite his rather humble and hesitant manner, the kid seemed to be knowledgeable and was asking about the styles crafted by the master blacksmith. Marco wondered if the kid was a pirate and idly edged closer under the pretext of examining a blunted zanbatu on display. Abruptly the kid flashed him a feral glare and flashed him snarl, showing off his teeth before politely excusing himself to the apprentice staffing the shop front and making his way up the street in the direction that Marco had come from. Twitchy kid. He mused, well, wouldn't be too surprising if he's part fishman. Only fishmen had teeth like that, but the shorty had a normal enough appearance otherwise. Still, even with the old man including Fishman Island under his protection, fishmen weren't exactly treated well. It was common knowledge and the driving force behind many fishmen pirates. They were pretty cranky guys as a general rule, and not someone you want to be on the bad side of, especially when they had an axe to grind. Aside from that, he had heard plenty from the fishmen on the crew. The brat's paranoia was annoying but understandable. He wondered about the bespectacled boy as he meandered further towards the docks. He jerked his head to the left, searching for it. a glimpse of a rich russet color that he had glimpsed out of the corner of his eye. Such an unusual color for this area. The owner was meandering into a rather grubby little store at the end of the street, right on the docks. Marco did not get to where he was through brute strength. He was skilled, powerful, and had an excellent devil fruit backing him up, true, but what allowed him to survive long enough to earn these things was his quick mind. Whitebeard wouldn't have made him 1st Division commander if he was some kind of moron. Speaking of morons, Ace had been bragging about his little brother earning a bounty. A member of that family is someone to look out for in his opinion. Still, you didn't need his brains to feel suspicious of this. Beautiful and elegant women didn't hang around dingy and disreputable stores on the port. He turned and made a beeline for the dingy little shop. The door creaked and a grimy bell clanged when Marco pushed it open. The grime on the windows occluded most of the sunlight, so the room was dark with heavy shadows cast around objects. A junk shop? No, a salvage shop. Treasures of the tides, huh? He mused and examined the woman with her back to him. She had hair reaching the back of her calves and part of it seemed to be tied up in some sort of top knot. Mind you, he smirked, hair that exact color is pretty unusual to see. Maybe she wants to show it off. Marco strolled further in and examined his surroundings. The shop seemed to have been entirely stocked by beachcombers and divers. If anything of real value had been recovered, he drawled as he examined a box of odd boots and sandals, it certainly wasn't put on display here. The woman made a sound of amusement. Value is what people attribute to items and not any indication of true worth. You never know, there could be a pirate scouring the sea for his favorite boot. He smirked and waved a boot in her direction. So, should I hold it for ransom then? She laughed merrily, bringing her closed hand up to her face. Marco admired her as she did so. She was an undeniably attractive woman in her blue dress. Was that fishnet underneath? That's something he hadn't seen before, was cut in a mildly provocative manner. He had seen women and girls wear far less and not obtain even a fraction of her effect. Jade green. So, he ran a finger over a shelf of water-damaged books. Are you looking for buried treasure or have you come to sell? She smiled at him and moved a couple of small boxes. Just browsing today. I've always found that the most interesting objects are washed up in the tides. She pulled something out of the box by her hand and flung it at him casually. He moved to one side and let the blade bury itself in the wall. Like that shuriken. They were quite common where I grew up, but they're rather unpopular out here. She tapped her index finger on her lower lip as she reflected. Of course. Swords were much more the done thing with us. We were quite infamous for our swordsmen at one time. Marco shifted into a loose and casual-looking stance. Oh, where's that? She paused and didn't look up from the crate she was rummaging in. Oh, that place doesn't exist anymore. Marco's mind was buzzing. The woman was skilled, to what extent was unclear, but she had placed herself in his category of potentially dangerous. She had hinted that she knew that he was no slouch himself. She had expected him to dodge that unusually shaped throwing knife. He wondered where she came from. Perhaps a country destroyed by the world government. He couldn't remember the last time he had met an even vaguely interesting woman, and this one was subtly established herself as a dangerous individual. He didn't miss the assessing gaze she used, one he employed himself. She was trying to figure out whether he was a threat without revealing her loyalties. Ah, you hear that sort of story more than you'd expect. She inclined her head in agreement and moved towards him. Sometimes, she said, I find relics of that way of life in places like this. When we are dead and gone, this junk becomes a monument to our previous existence. An emblem that our way of life once existed. She reached around him and smiled softly. Excuse me. He stepped to one side to give her access to a particularly grubby box that was showing the signs of use and abuse more clearly than some of the others. He peered over her shoulder to see what had caught her interest. She efficiently searched the box and pulled out several items. Ojiazan, I'll be taking these off your hands, she cheerfully called out. There wasn't any response, and Marco felt that she was probably just paying some kind of lip service, but who was a pirate to judge? She slid some battered scrolls into her pack secured on the small of her back and held up the remaining item for his inspection. A dull belt composed of engraved squares linked together dangled from her fingertips. She eyed him in amusement and he arched his eyebrows before giving his opinion. Grubby, she giggled. True, but it'll wash. Do you know what this is? A belt. She pouted and he quietly admired the attractive set of her lips. It's a treasure, a ceremonial treasure commissioned for the leader of a clan from my homeland. Marco tilted his head cynically. How did you know it was there? Seems strange to me. It's a sealed belt. A master worked upon this for the one that commissioned it. It has a mark that's clear to those that can see it. He nodded slowly. He'd heard stranger things on his time on the Grand Line. It almost sounded like hockey. This sort of thing, she held it higher while she examined it, is really no good for the likes of me. I'm the wrong type. He folded his arms across his chest and her eyes flicked to his tattoo. I think God would go perfectly good with your hair, or do you prefer something with silver? Her eyes widened slightly and he smiled inwardly. It was the first time he had managed to throw her composure, even if it was only minutely. A fire is no good for the water. Tori-san, she shot back. You, he stiffened, cursing himself for letting his guard down. That was like something a rookie would do. She tilted her head, letting her hair fall away from her eyes, and stared at him. Was it a secret? Your energy marked you the minute you followed me in here. Anyone who was trained with the skill could identify you as a fire type. Your chakra is restrained, true, but your nature is impossible to conceal. She slipped into a loose fighting stance, curling the gold belt around her arm like a makeshift brace. Did someone send you after me, or did you hear rumors about the truth? Marco wrinkled his forehead and held his hands up in a placating manner. Wait, hold on now, Ojsen. I thought you might be a bounty hunter for a moment there, but don't go thinking that I am. I'm a pirate, and regarding yourself, I'll admit to indulging by curiosity when I saw you come in here. She shifted back to a casual stance, letting the belt tumble free and swing towards the ground. I'm not a bounty hunter, although I won't deny that I did such missions when I was younger. I'm not with the Marines and I'm not a pirate. If anything, I'm a refugee from an overthrown nation turned traveler. He let down his hands quietly, relieved that he wouldn't have to fight her. Hurting her would leave a bad taste in his mouth. Ma, so we're agreed then. Just some dangerous curiosity and a little misunderstanding between us then. She folded her arms under her S, much to his gratitude, and smiled frostily. Just what about me shopping here is so damn fascinating, Tori-san? You looked a little high class for this store. I thought you might have been a Marine agent. She flushed. Well, you're wrong there. I'm just a homeless vagabond. Might as well be a pirate if I'm going to get randomly accused by men in every town I visit. He smiled. Well, how about I pay for your purchases as my way of apology, and then I can buy you a drink? The expression around her eyes softened, clearly amused at his audacity. I'm not going to pay for them anyway, and besides, I have to go meet up with my traveling companion. As she spoke, she gathered up the belt and walked towards him. This belt, she murmured, belonged to family renowned for their prowess in the arts of fire. It has special properties to it. What does it do? Nothing at all, but the treatment of it made it impervious to the fire arts of the owner. It was made after a warrior got tired of melting belts and weapons while perfecting the pinnacle of his martial art. He looked at the belt warily. If that was true, then it was pretty impressive. This was the Grand Line. He idly wondered if there was seastone in it. Of course, she sighed, it was personalized for that particular man who died a long time ago. The seals don't really work for anyone else. But to those of us who came from the same place, the symbol is recognizable. Which is that of the indomitable will of fire. The land is gone, but the people live on as long as their desire to live still burns. They were known for their power and protective nature of their nakama. She shrugged carelessly. I was of a land of water though, so that fire wasn't as significant to me. She caught his eye and smiled slyly, and he realized just how close he had let her come. He wasn't complaining though when he felt her arms slip around his waist and her lips brush his ears as she whispered, "Suits you well, Tori-san." Marco blinked. 1 minute a gorgeous and dangerous woman was sliding her arms around him, and the next she was gone. He sneezed and marveled at how damp the air seemed to have gotten all of a sudden. It was shameful. He was the first commander for the Yonko Edward Newgate. Just what the hell had he been smoking to let himself get so sloppy? He fumed inwardly and resolved to hit the bars with Ace and see if he could find an interested girl the next time they made port. He slammed the door and made his way back to the ship, cursing to himself the whole way about curiosity. sloppiness and red-haired nymphs lurking around ports. He made his way back to the ship and nodded to Thatch and Jozu, noting that while Teach was making his way down the deck, Ace was nowhere to be seen. "Oi!" Ace still stuffing his face then. Thatch grinned. "This is Ace-kun we're talking about here. We'll be casting off shortly, so he'll probably make a move just before then." Jozu nodded towards Marco's waist in question. Marco blinked before looking down at the golden belt slung across his hip and tucked into his waistband. "Hey, that's pretty nice, Marco. Needs a clean though. Where'd you get that?" Ace popped up behind him, grinning sheepishly while Thatch and Jozu chuckled. "Junk shop," said Marco, sloping off down the deck. A grin twitched on his mouth. It had been an interesting day after all. They were setting out again, and who could be dissatisfied with a gift from a beautiful woman? Just, how did she disappear like that? You'd think she was some kind of ninja. Why, yay, I am a fan of melodrama. Most of the characters are going to be in pretty poor shape when they first appear. Ho 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 ho. Now so far we've had a dying man who had not recovered when we left him, and an elegant and mysterious woman along with her twitchy young traveling companion. Oh, the places we'll see, the people we'll meet, the suggestions you give could remind me of your favorite character, so feel free to drop me a line. Just a reminder that this is completely and the timeline is also going to be played around with, so pretty much everything is going to be out of chronological order. The next few chapters will focus on some more cheerful scenes. Thank you for your hits and reviews. I hope you're all enjoying this. Any con crit is helpful, smiley face. Luffy was a moron. Granted, Zoro knew that from the moment the gangly-limbed boy had clambered onto the wall of the marine base, but it was still irritating as hell. He was used to it, and Luffy was his captain. He would follow him to the gates of hell or Enies lobby, whichever came first, but the bottom line was that a lot of responsibility fell onto his shoulders as first mate. When Luffy came tearing back to the Going Merry with a young woman slung over his shoulder, he idly wondered if that idiot had realized he was a teenager and decided to get a girlfriend, or if he had finally found himself a musician to join the crew. It was damn hard to say no to Luffy on certain manners. He put that aside to join the others in yelling abuse at the captain for abducting a local girl. There was no decent reason to go searching for trouble on this island after all. It's not as if Mihawk or Shanks had shown up and demanded a duel. Luffy dropped the girl on the middle of the deck and grinned. Shishishishishi. Hey guys, we got a new nakama. You idiot. The Mugiwara pirates quickly displayed their unity by applying a simultaneous combo to the head of their lunkhead captain. The arrow cook continued to kick the rubber man about the place while ranting about treating women the right way. Nami helped the shell-shocked girl to her feet, apologizing for the actions of her captain, while Robin, that damn suspicious woman, watched everything with an unusual gravity. Her interest alone was reason enough to sharpen his guard. They still didn't know everything about her, and she was a previous subordinate of Crocodile. Luffy didn't explain what had happened, but just accepted her presence on the crew in his usual simple-minded manner. It fell to Zoro as first mate to keep an eye on everything when he wasn't taking his naps, and he did not like that idea of another untrustworthy woman coming on board. Especially with that idiot arrow cook wiggling about. He had already finished with Luffy and was prancing around the girl in Melorine mode, that idiot. "Luffy," he said, "why did you grab this girl?" He glared at her as if it was somehow her fault and was gratified so her worried expression. Possibly not a viable threat, but... Luffy bounced back off the ground, his beating abruptly forgotten. "She's our new medic." Gah! Chopper jerked in surprise and began to tear up. Wah! "Luffy, don't you guys want me anymore? Aren't I doing a good job?" Nami punched Luffy and started screaming at him with her trademark, "Luffy is an idiot and I'm enraged beyond belief" expression, while Robin soothed the sniffling Chopper. "We can all testify that you are an excellent medic, Dr. San. I'm sure that Captain San will be more than happy to explain." "Wait now, hold on. I'm not replacing anyone here." The girl held her hands out in a placating gesture. "I'm actually still not sure what's going on. Luffy-san just told me to become one of his nakama and brought me back here." Zoro sighed. That seems about right for Luffy. She was rather thin. He noted it was the kind of thinness that resulted from a long illness rather than any kind of diet and exercise. She had shadows under her eyes, green and long stringy black hair, which Zoro was certain that she dyed, but damned if he could think of a reason why. She wore a long-sleeved black shirt and capri trousers that fell to mid-calf and black sandals along with shin protectors that disappeared under the hem of her trousers. Her clothes were all rather baggy and unflattering, and she wore a pair of black gloves that were mostly hidden by her long sleeves. A thin, unhealthy-looking woman that covered herself up completely and held herself as if she was perennially exhausted. It didn't make for an impressive figure, and you would be forgiven for thinking poorly of Luffy for dragging her onto a pirate ship when she looked as if she'd rather be asleep somewhere. Roronoa Zoro was someone who had dedicated themselves to their dream at a very young age. The way of the blade had been his life for as long as he could remember. He had been determined to be the best before he had even met Kuina and attended her father's dojo. He had dedicated all of his being to his dream, and if he died before he succeeded, then it just meant that he wasn't strong enough. He was skilled, determined, and had the sheer bloody-minded stubbornness to just actually do it. Zoro was observant. He didn't always care about what went on around him. He had other priorities like sleeping, training and drinking, but he had a particularly astute sense for potential fights. He could discern a difference between civilians and combatants. He knew who was a challenge and who was beneath his interest. This girl that Luffy had picked up was undernourished, pale and dressed like a street urchin with body confidence issues. She was unlikely to be an active threat, but he could see, from the way she moved, that whatever her issues were, that she was a trained fighter. Luffy rubbed his finger under his nose and grinned mindlessly. Minna, this is Sakura. Shishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishishish. That's not a job. That's not a job. Usopp screeched, smacking his hand in a dismissive manner. We already have a doctor, you bastard. Are you saying I'm not good enough anymore? Grah. Chopper strangled Luffy while in heavy point mode. Sakura wore an expression of consternation and looked to the others for guidance. Era, are you a doctor too, Sakura-san? Said Robin, raising one elegant brow with interest. I was trained as a battlefield medic, she murmured, but I don't do that anymore. Why not? Skills like that would get you quite a profitable job. Questioned Nami. Doctors are always in demand, and those with military training even more so. You could make a lot of belly. I just don't. It's not any of your damn business, crazy pirate woman, Sakura snapped. You guys have an admittedly odd but perfectly good doctor. There's no reason to be harassing me. Especially as I'm not even a practicing physician. Luffy blinked. I don't want you to join because you're a doctor. That's Chopper's job. Sakura inwardly marveled at how blasé he seemed to be about the violent beating that the Tanuki had doled out. Then why did you ask me? And grab me off the road? Because you're really strong. He laughed. Nami and Robin are really tough, but they can't smash things like that. She gasped and shuddered. Horror flew over her face as she heard this. What do you mean? What did you see? Luffy edged his head to one side. Ma, you know. Where you broke open the ground with your fist. Interesting. Everyone focused on Sakura with varying degrees of interest as her trembling increased. No one was expecting her to drop to her knees and slam her forehead to the ground. Don't tell anyone, she begged. Better you kill me now and burn my corpse than turn me in. The Mugiwaras were stunned. What was so fearful that she would rather face death? I cannot fight anymore. I failed to save a single one of my friends. I was trained to fight and treat battle wounds, but I couldn't save anyone. She wept onto the deck of Mary, refusing to move from her prostration. I cannot pass muster as any sort of medic, and I have lost all will to fight. My fire was extinguished, and all I can do now is keep this one secret. I cannot even properly fulfill my oath. If you expose me, then I no longer desire this worthless life. Oi, I won't tell your secret if it's that important to you, but I don't know what it is. Luffy grabbed her by the arms and lifted her up. What would your Nakama think if they saw you like this? If anything happened to me, then I'd want my Nakama to keep going and fulfill their dreams. I'd never forgive them if they gave up for a stupid reason like that. She shook her head rapidly and flailed. Let go of me. Just don't tell anyone what you saw, and I won't tip off the Marines. Luffy looked at Sakura's tear-streaked face with a serious expression. I'll keep your secret and you become our Nakama. Why? I just told you I won't fight and all of my patients die. Why would you want a cursed person like me on your crew? Robin started at this statement. Luffy grinned. You need nakama and I want you to join our crew. Shishishishishishishi. He stood her next to Zoro and turned to the cook, Sanji. I'm hungry Miku. Zoro had many roles on the crew. The first mate, the swordsman, the friend, the big brother, serial catnapper. He looked out for his captain and his crewmates as they all chased after their dreams. Luffy had never been wrong yet, although his tendency to leave out the details and be casual about serious matters did make it hard to understand the full story sometimes. He'd met people with PTSD before, Marines that had been sent to the weakest of the seas to recuperate after seeing horrors of wars and various atrocities. This girl had been promising and talented. No one is allowed to train as a field medic if they're not. She had been like any of them before everything was stripped away. By her own admission, she had seen her nakama die and had been unable to do anything. Luffy could see that she would either kill herself or waste away to nothing if left alone. She was unlikely to be a danger to any of the others, but she was a danger to herself. She seemed terrified of something getting discovered. Was it the strength that Luffy so casually mentioned? It was impressive but not really too unusual on the Grand Line. She didn't seem to qualify their status as pirates as important though. It just didn't feature on her list of priorities. Strange. It was her business really, but Luffy made the decision. He decided to choose her for his crew and that was that. He hadn't been turned down yet. He really was an unrepentant moron. A moron but still their captain. Zoro really needed another nap. Oi, you damn Marimo, wake up damn it or I'll feed your share to Luffy. TCH. Stupid arrow chef. The tavern was hopping and the staff was sweating. It was the kind of place that could claim to have more business than they could handle. It may have been the only pub on the island but it was a damned good one. So why? Ace sulked. Are the kitchens closed? He had a sneaking suspicion that his reputation had preceded him and that the proprietors choose discretion as the greater part of valor by simply cutting off the supply routes. Or maybe one of loyal comrades had tipped them off as a joke. He was hungry. Ace slouched over the bar eyeing the door to the kitchens. He wanted his eats and this was the only place on the island. He ignored the cloaked man that slid into the seat next to him. The bartender took the newcomer's order and set a plate of onigiri in front of him before going into the back, presumably to bring in a new barrel for the drinkers. The sole son of Portgas D. Rouge eyeballed the plate of rice balls enviously before glancing at the owner. The man appeared to be about his age and his hair was ridiculous, no question about that. He was blind and wore a dark navy bandana over his eyes. This fact alone, accompanied by Ace's dire need for sustenance, led to the infamous pirate stealthily reaching his hand towards the plate and narrowly avoiding a chopstick to the hand. The man turned his head and regarded Ace silently, which was kind of creepy when his eyes and a good portion of his face was concealed by the bandana. Ace scratched his head sheepishly while his stomach decided that it was the perfect time to voice its complaints with a large growl. I don't care how hungry you are, the man drawled. But there are two things in this world that I will not share with anyone. The first obviously being his onigiri. What's the other? Tomatoes. An awkward silence followed that statement. Ace coughed. I thought the kitchens were closed. There, he replied through a mouthful of rice. I took a room for the night and ordered my dinner before they closed. That's not a dinner. It suits me just fine. You're just sulking that you don't have any dinner. Ace pouted and the man snickered. He signaled the barkeeper. So cousin, he grinned, how about we share a drink and you can tell me about your last voyage? The party was still in full swing and despite the distinct lack of food, Ace wondered if he was channeling Luffy tonight. He was having a blast. Sasuke was great fun and he was getting on with any and all in the bar. He didn't like any of the girls that attempted to drape themselves over him, but he skillfully deflected them with a skill that spoke of years of experience. He kept referring to Ace as Kusen though, so it was possible he had that in his full name, but Ace knew better than to ask. Everyone was trading stories and gossip. Pirates gossip too. It's just generally about bounties and similar things. It turned out that Sasuke was heading in the opposite direction. For no particular reason, it just happened out that way, and gleefully informed Ace on his suggestions for restaurants, extracting a promise to eat a couple of places out of house and home. The waitresses wouldn't leave him alone to eat in one place and the chef wasn't in the others even if the food was pretty good. Sasuke was a lot like Ace personality-wise, so it was no surprise that they both got on so well. They were serious and responsible but were perfectly happy to join in with the partying going on. In fact, Sasuke was the one to kick off this particular shindig. After working their way through several bottles of sake and moving on to tankards of ale, he decided to buy a round of drinks for everyone there on the condition that those annoying little girls stay on the far side of the room from me. Their outrage was palatable, but Sasuke's laughter was louder until he fell off the bar and it was muffled on by the counter. The bandana on his eyes didn't seem to hamper him, and he cheerfully remarked that he was used to it. Besides, there were fringe benefits such as not having to look at ugly mugs like Ace. Sunrise was just beginning to creep over the horizon as the party finally begun to wind down. People just dropped where they were and the entire floor was soon covered with drunken snoring bodies. Sasuke and Ace settled themselves on the bench outside the door and relaxed in the wavering light. "Yo, Sasuke-san," mused Ace, "did anyone ever tell you that the back of your head looks like a teal's ass?" Sasuke guffawed. "You wouldn't be the first to do so." He pulled out a long thin pipe decorated with swirling silver designs and began puffing on it. Ace never saw him light it. The fireman folded his arms across his chest and yawned before leaning back against the wall, letting his hat fall over his eyes. "So, is it hard?" Sasuke blew out a long stream of smoke, being blind. "No, not really. I'm pretty well equipped to deal with it." "No, not that. Then what?" "Smiling like that when you've lost everything." Sasuke let his pipe slide through his fingers and point towards the floor. "You're more observant than I gave you credit for," he rumbled in a pleased tone. "Yes, it is extremely difficult. But probably no more than I deserve. I've done some truly terrible things in my life. I betrayed my home, made attempts on the lives of comrades, and dedicated myself to the path of revenge. A person like me has no right to cling to life." Ace regarded him out of the corner of his eye. "If you feel like that, then why do you try to enjoy the life you have so much?" "Because it's the final wish of much better men than me," he smiled sadly. "I have this and an oath I made. I will live to fulfill them for the people who refused to let me wallow in the darkness I chose." Sasuke tapped his pipe on the edge of the bench. "My brother, he was a great man. If I even come close to him, then I can die with satisfaction." Despite the grievous hangovers that almost everyone, including the bartender, seemed to have, preparations were made to move on to the next destination. Sasuke came to the port and Ace hopped off the ship to say goodbye. The blind man strolled up using a chakudo as a walking stick. "You don't need that. You never used it to dance across the bar top." "True, but I'd so hate to disappoint those who expect a blind man to use one." "You sure you don't want to join up with us? I have my own path to follow. Next time we meet, you'll buy the drinks and you better not welch. Your Nakama told me about your tendency to dine and dash." Ace whistled innocently and abruptly changed the subject. "Well, you take care of yourself anyway. I was wondering though, why do you call me Kusen?" A beatific smile split Sasuke's face. "We share a common feature, one that my family was once well known for. Though you probably rank a bit above me in that area. I'll tell you if you figure it out." Fire Fist Ace. "I'm actually a Vivi Koza fan, but WTH, I've randomly decided to ship him with someone else, so roll with it. I've been careless and not added disclaimers, so I'll do it now. I don't own or profit from anything. All creations are the property of their respective creators. Please support the original works." Smiley face. "Thank you for your support. When a woman sweeps into town and demands to know what her part of the rebuilding effort will be, you tell her." In retrospect, his failure to do so was Koza's first mistake. His second was telling her that she would be a burden on an already struggling outpost with her disability. This was probably why she broke his nose and directed the same question at Toto, who cheerfully put her to work. It wasn't the best start to any kind of relationship, but there was a definite impression left on both sides. Koza said it wasn't ingratitude, a comment on her abilities or a slur on her, but she had to understand his apprehension letting a person do this kind of work with that kind of hurdle to overcome. He was still recovering himself and knew the frustration of his will outstripping the capabilities of his body. She declared that she would work to her limits and wasn't arrogant about where to draw the line. Besides, she'd had worse. She got on well with Toto, who was quick to offer her a room in their house. Despite what some of the neighbors expected, it was Koza who did most of the cooking. Toto was a poor cook and she was used to subsisting on military-style rations. Another question to her past: he'd know if she'd been a member of the rebellion force. She did most of the cleaning, but they did laundry together. She was strong, but it was one of those things that you would rather have two arms for. She didn't remember her mother. When she let her hair down, she claimed to resemble her more, but she kept it in the unusual pigtail style that she had adopted early on in life. Koza had known his mother well. She had survived to see the birth of Yuba before she died. A river of blood that swept her away with his little brother who didn't receive a name. She gave him a bittersweet smile and told him a terrible and wonderful story of madness, redemption and blood. Koza saw that everyone knew suffering in some form of another, but the cruelty to families always seemed especially bitter to him. She would dress outrageously just to annoy him. He fretted about so much skin being exposed in a desert climate, and that her provocative clothing would attract men willing to overlook her status as a cripple. He would argue with her and get dismissed equally fast, leaving him to fume and snarl at anyone he suspected of looking at her inappropriately. When she turned her head to give him a sneaky smile, he felt that perhaps they suited her just a little bit. She wore her cloak across her right shoulder. If you didn't know, you'd never suspect that anything was missing. He wondered about how she had come to lose it, but never dared to ask. She was the type of person that if she wanted you to know, she would tell you. She had told him about her brothers and her father. She spat when she said his name and cursed his grave and the wars that she had fought. For now, he was content to wait. Alabasta was a desert country. The dust hung in the air and the rocks cracked and peeled away to become part of the sands. Water was a precious commodity and rain was a blessing. The life was comparatively harsh, but the people were as much a part of the desert as the sands. Foreigners found the adjustment hard, and people from kinder climates rarely settled within their borders. She was entirely different and yet the same. From a different culture, but with a core of something that was undisputedly the same. A child of the desert. She didn't mention her homeland much. Her stories were of people, not places, but when she did, she referred to it as Suna. She wanted a home in the desert. Whatever bad memories she had in the places she had visited, the desert had always been her home. She had been born there. She wanted to die there. She was pleased, admitted to Koza over a private meal when his father had disappeared, off to visit unexpectedly, that Alabasta contained such people. The sort of people, she explained, that possessed a strength. They faced their problems and hefted their responsibility to build a country that they could be proud of. Everyone loved their country and was willing to protect it in the way they thought was best. The royal family, also, was unlike any she had ever seen. Perhaps, she spoke softly, if the daimyos had been more like King Cobra. It was probably the most detail she ever told him about her previous life. A madman came to the town. He attacked everyone who crossed his path and raved about demons and the end of days. When he couldn't find a person to torment, he clawed and stabbed at himself, screaming about filth and corruption. He had unusual strength and powers like those of devil fruit user. He spat fire at the houses and burned several people to death. She strode out to meet him and unfurled the scroll that had been of her few items of luggage when she first arrived. The fan was enormous but clearly an effectual weapon. She blocked his fire attacks, and when he ran at her screaming, she swung her arm and created a vortex of slicing winds that suspended him in midair. When he collapsed in the dust, she efficiently cut his throat and buried her knife in his skull. When the militia appeared shortly after, she claimed responsibility for the deed. They weren't pleased to learn of his death but agreed it was one of the better outcomes. With no one to interrogate and an unidentified corpse, it fell to the state to determine his burial until Tamari demanded the right to claim the body. When the ashes had been scattered, Tamari and Koza shared a pitcher of water. Pell had agreed to scatter the ashes as a favor to Koza and as a mark of respect to the surprising fearsome battle prowess of Tamari. He couldn't fault her actions, he admitted. After all, she had been protecting something important. That evening, Tamari was honest about a lot of things. That's not to say it was clear and understandable, but her motives were a little clearer. She spoke of death, destruction, blood and loss before she told him about her strength to live on. She had fought with all of her soul and had nothing to regret. She touched the stump of her right shoulder as she said this and smiled bitterly. Finally she spoke of an oath that she swore. Koza made a promise to a woman of the desert, a woman of Alabasta. When she closed her eyes for the final time, he would take her to the edge of the land and build her a pyre. He would burn her body and scatter the ashes to the wind. He prayed every day that this moment will never come, but knows that some things really are inevitable. When a woman asks you to help her fulfill her most sacred oath, you agree. Polly lived his life a certain way according to certain rules and had little patience for those that challenged it. He loved his job, cigars and gambling. He hated creditors, being in debt and shameless women who went around parading acres of naked flesh. It was indecent and he couldn't understand how everyone stood for it. As far as Polly was concerned, there was only 3 places and situations where an absence of clothing was necessary, and the final one was a non-existent issue for him due to his feelings on the subject. He couldn't really understand people who disagreed with him and felt that he was probably the only man left on Water 7 that possessed any sort of morals. For some strange reason though, there was a lot of people that whispered that he was gay. But this was Water 7, where the shipwright was king. The people adored the Galila workers. They loved them so much that if this scurrilous rumor happened to be true, then they would gladly throw him a coming out party. For the record, it wasn't. But Polly was so fervent in his ideals that short of ankle-length skirts and long-sleeved polo necks coming into fashion, there was little chance of any of his dates ending well. Not that it dissuaded any of his fans. The Galila Company was famous for its shipwrights. It proved itself to be one of the best shipyards in the world with a reputation for excellence and innovation. It didn't employ women, and before you label them as East and rant about equality, let me inform you that there were no female shipwrights in Water 7. They probably existed elsewhere in the world, but they were a small minority. It was a difficult, labor-intensive profession. The workers of Galila were tough enough to take on renowned pirates and come out on top before returning to their work. They had various administrative staff come and go, but currently Khalifa was the only woman working there as Iceberg's beautiful secretary. She didn't get the job because she was attractive now. She got it because she was so damn efficient she could run the world government single-handedly, which is a desirable trait in secretaries. And very hard to find, which is why several years later Iceberg had so much trouble when he tried to hire a new one. Thus a large majority of the workers were somewhat starved of female interaction. Also, they didn't have enough of a life outside their work, and this was Water 7. Where men were known for treating women well but essentially being leches. Polly deduced that banning women from the shipyards was the only way to deal with this and was furious whenever work was interrupted for such frivolous reasons. There was only one woman who didn't evoke that reaction. There were many reasons for this. For one thing, she dressed in a flattering but modest manner. Another, she didn't barge in and interrupt their work, and finally, she had been unconscious and fell limply from the sky. Chance had saved her life. Tileston had just happened to look up and shouted a warning. Everyone rushed into action. Kaku, that damned building hopper, had disappeared off to inspect a ship the one time that his skills were almost necessary, so it fell to Polly to take the lead, with the others quickly moving into position to back him up. Lucci caught his foot and gave him a boost to the top of the buildings, where he immediately created several nets to catch the person. She plummeted into his arms at such a speed as to knock the wind out of him and causing them both to be thrown back into the ropes, with Polly's back taking the brunt of the blow. If that had been anything other than Galila rope, he realized, we both would have fallen through. When the net stopped swinging, he hefted her more comfortably in his arms and slid down another rope produced for that purpose. She blinked blearily and seemed exhausted. Where am I? Everyone looked surprised that she was even conscious, but knew better than to judge by appearances. She was pretty suspicious anyway. How on earth did she fall from the sky like that? What happened? Hattori cooed. If Polly didn't know better, he'd swear that Lucci looked inordinately interested. Don't know. Soldiers, some sort of riot in that town. A large man, he swung at me and I was sent flying. Tilestone coughed. Joe-san, why were you in that place? Passing through, traveling. She closed her eyes and her breathing deepened to the relaxed regular rhythm of someone in a deep sleep. They wasted no time in getting her to a doctor. Shizune stayed in a local clinic where she was pronounced extremely healthy apart from a serious case of chronic exhaustion. It was determined that she had run afoul of the Shichibukai Bartholomew Kuma in a simple case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. When she recovered sufficiently, she had visited the shipyard to give her thanks. Kaku had met her at the gate hovering, and she explained her presence and hesitation, saying that she did not want to get in the way of their work, but had to thank those who had helped her, thereby impressing the eavesdroppers with her conscientious nature. It went unsaid that she would have died if the Galila worker failed to intercede. Iceberg, whom everyone in the city loved and obeyed, was very particular about health and safety with the workers. Everyone had a mandated amount of time that they had to use in their workday to take a break or have lunch. It just so happened that Polly was about to go on his lunch break, which more often than not involved running from his various creditors, when Kaku brought her into the yard and suggested that since Polly was really the one to save her, that she take him to lunch. Feeling that there were far too many things wrong with that suggestion, Polly decided to attack Kaku rather than waste time explaining them all. They scuffled for a few minutes before being pulled apart, and it ended with Polly agreeing to accept her heartfelt expression of gratitude of saving her life. Damn Tilestone. Shizune led the way, saying that she wanted to go to this particularly nice cafe near the market that made sandwiches and desserts to order. This gave Polly a chance to observe her closely and get more of a measure of her. She was attractive and had the kind of face that looked best smiling. Her black hair was cut to her shoulders, and she wore some variety of wrap-around dress that was tight enough to be flattering but loose enough to meet Polly's fierce standards of female decency. More importantly, she didn't gush or fawn like some of the fangirls that congregated near the shipyards, or throw herself at him like some of the shameless women around the city. She was friendly, polite and grateful, entirely appropriate and ladylike. She maintained a distance that was close enough to interact but far enough to show that they were casual acquaintances at best. She asked him intelligent questions about his job, Water 7, Iceberg, and various things about Water 7. Later he wondered if Kaku had realized that this would happen, and if he did, he'd get that bastard for interfering in his life. By the time they had reached the cheerfully decorated cafe, Polly was completely and utterly smitten. Polly couldn't remember the last time he had enjoyed a meal so much. He liked having a drink with his coworkers, but meals had always been eat when you were hungry affairs for him. He could cook fairly well but never saw the point. The only proper meal he regularly had was when he went to his parents for dinner about once a fortnight. Eating with Shizune, everything just tasted better and seemed more filling. As this sunk in, he got nervous and started babbling about rigging, which was in his personal top 5 of things worth talking about, but she didn't mind. She listened interestedly and asked questions about things she didn't understand. She found stories of his apprenticeship under Iceberg fascinating and told him about her own apprenticeship under an innovative medic. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had such a good time with a woman. He was afraid that he might have scared her off when he leapt up to yell at a passing group of girls for dressing in such a shameless manner. Her stunned expression caused him to start cursing himself for his thoughtless idiocy until she burst into laughter, claiming that it was a refreshing change when compared with the kind of men and super perverts she had grown up with. He doubted that she realized, but at this stage he had become her willing and eternal slave for that alone. Polly, his face now brick red, was just working up the courage to ask her to dinner when his creditors rounded the corner and shot everything to hell. It was the same game everywhere he went. The day never ended without of his patented escape routines. It was a regular event and he was used to it. Occasionally he saved up enough cash to pay off his debts, and there was a brief respite, but that only lasted until he blew his next paycheck in the gambling dens and sent himself into debt again. This time was slightly different. "Why the hell are you following me, woman?" She shrugged. "You started running, so I followed. Are those guys moneylenders?" He flinched, embarrassed. She kept pace with his longer stride easily enough and seemed contemplative. "Well, I could draw them off, but they're only after you, so." Shizune grabbed his arm and jerked him into a side street. She led them on a chase through the alleys, choosing a random and complicated pattern. When the fleeing duo reached a dead end, she ran to the wall and bounced off a lower ledge, vaulting over the fencing. He followed, marveling at her prowess. They ended up in a quiet, more residential district and stopped to listen for sounds of their pursuers, but they had succeeded in losing them. "Why did you do that? I'm more of capable of running away by myself." He chewed on his cigar. "You didn't need to get yourself involved." She regarded him silently before coming to some sort of decision. "My so, She was a terrible gambler. She was known infamously as the legendary sucker. I spent most of my life following her. I'm used to outrunning debt collectors. She paused and bit her lip. It's not that I doubt your ability to take care of yourself, but I couldn't not want to help you when it happens right in front of me. They both stood in embarrassed silence for a few moments. Thank you, he grunted and was rewarded with a smile. Wordlessly he began leading the way back to the docks. Shizune had trained as a medic. In fact, she was probably one of the most gifted doctors on the planet. But, as she explained to Polly, there was a lot of things that didn't come up in her home country, so she had to take some exams and extra seminars in order to get her medical license over here. She got a job in the hospital and quickly proved herself to the staff. She was soon working like any other doctor and proved to be very popular with her patients. She took a small apartment and continued her studies while preparing for her exams. They both were very busy and very shy, but Polly and Shizune had lunch together at least once a week. They considered it a success if they managed to finish their meal without the creditors chasing them off. It was this cherished tradition that led to the events of one sunny afternoon. Polly was in a good mood. His debts were down and work was going well. The weather was nice and today he was going to have lunch with Shizune. He was really surprised that things had been going so well. His bad luck with money usually extended to women, but they usually fell into two categories. Those that had no interest or proper respect for his craft, and shameless women who dressed indecently, had no self-respect and threw themselves at him at every opportunity. In fact, things with Shizune were so wonderful that he was verging on suspicious. Shizune dressed modestly. She said that she simply liked to and found it comfortable. He had never seen her wear anything shorter than mid-calf or mid-arm. To his mind, she was already beautiful and didn't need to dress like an immoral woman to prove it, plus she was willing to overlook his gambling and debts. What good fortune that he had met such a wonderful woman. It was almost worth the ribbing he took from the other foreman. Hattori kept cooing about how no sane woman would agree, she must be hiding something, which led to him getting in a fight with Lucci. Kaku just smiled inanely while commenting how cute they were. Lulu and Tilestone cried tears of bitterness regarding the whole situation, and Polly took that to mean that they were idiots. It was just about that time and Polly was looking over some blueprints while waiting for Shizune. She always came to the entrance of Dock 1 to meet him and he would walk her back to work. When they weren't fleeing from his creditors, but that was less likely today. Unfortunately, some pirates decided to start some trouble by refusing to pay for their repairs. Normally, this wouldn't be an issue as the craftsmen were more than capable of kicking ass, taking names and claiming bounties in order to pay the bills that the pirates refused to. But it so happened that these pirates were a smidge more intelligent, and what means is that they figured out Shizune's connection to Polly and waited until she came to the gate before grabbing her as a hostage. Shizune was wearing a pair of trousers and her favorite long shirt with the extra long sleeves. She loved this outfit because it reminded her of the better days of Konoha before everything. Well, anyway, she was going to meet her boyfriend Polly for lunch. He was such a sweet guy, a little eccentric, but she had grown up around the likes of Jiraiya-sama, Tsunade-sama and Kakashi-san, so was used to weirdos. Polly was positively mild in that aspect. He was so considerate and passionate about his work. He really idolized Iceberg-san and she could empathize. In truth, it made her miss Tsunade-sama a little more at times, but the way things had spun out of control so wildly, there was nothing anyone could have done then. It wasn't worth dwelling on that sort of past really. She had to go take her licensing exams soon, and it was time spent with Polly that really gave her the breathing air she needed. She blushed. They were moving slow, but that was okay for them. After all, Polly had made it clear that he didn't approve of casual relationships and was completely serious about her. To meet someone like that in this world, she was almost tempted to seek out that strange bear man and thank him for sending her to Water 7. She made her way to the gat all wrapped up in her thoughts and missed the pirates until they had grabbed her. Polly had certain ideas about life and didn't understand people who didn't think the same way as him. His girlfriend Shizune was his idea of a wonderful woman. She was beautiful, dressed modestly and respectfully, was smart, funny, kind, talented, skilled, very dedicated to her job and worried about other people. The fact that the pirates had taken her hostage was unacceptable. The Galila workers were about to move when they all realized that Polly would have to add something else to the list, that she could lay the smackdown when necessary. Shizune gripped at the arm around her neck. How could she have been so careless? Polly and the other workers looked so worried. What if they got hurt because of this? She was an elite Junin, the first apprentice of Tsunade of the Sannin Doomnit. With that thought in mind she moved. She snapped the arm holding her and swung above the head of the pirate, breaking the jaw of the man on his right. She flung some judiciously aimed acupuncture needles, disabling several more and smashed bones of anyone who came close. Apprenticed to Tsunade, of course she knows the super strength technique. She kicked off the head of another pirate and released a cloud of paralytic gas, dropping the remainder. She followed her trajectory and landed in front of the gobsmacked workers, to be promptly hugged by a furiously worried Polly. Shizune was heading to another island to sit her licensing exams. It would take the better part of 2 weeks. Polly had taken a half day to see her off, or rather Iceberg had anticipated this and arranged it weeks in advance so that Polly wouldn't get called back for an emergency. He had been horribly surprised to see Shizune fight those pirates, but he was glad she could take care of herself so well. Water 7 was on the Grand Line. They had seen much stranger things than a woman protecting herself. He glanced at her as they approached the station. Nervous? Don't be, you'll do fine. She denied. I'm excited. I've never ridden the Puffing Tom before. It's such an amazing piece of work. He laughed, glad they agreed on that item at the very least. Besides, she continued, isn't it what inspired you to become a shipwright? He nodded in confirmation and turned into the station. He helped her stow her luggage and they stood awkwardly while he tried to figure out what to say. He ended up babbling again, that she wouldn't be long, that she'd ace those exams, and even though he knew she could take care of herself, to please be careful because he'd miss her Doomnit. Shizune smiled and stepped up to him. With quick reflexes she stole his cigar and kissed him soundly. Polly watched the train until it was gone. He lit up a cigar and headed back to the shipyards. He failed to notice the thrilled workers of the station who had set off to spread the word of the great romance between the lovely Dr. Shizune and one of the famous foremen of Dock 1. If he had known, you can guarantee that they wouldn't have got far. Lucci hated Kumadori. Well, to be fair, Lucci hated everybody. It wasn't personal, just the type of personality he seemed to have. He was what Jabura termed, and of the highest caliber, or Kaku described as, superiority complex incarnate. Khalifa just adjusted her glasses and remarked that, Lucci was Lucci, so it was probably best to leave it at that. Irregardless, Kumadori was special today because Lucci hated him more than anyone else right now, and there was no guarantee any of the others would mind if he killed him. The reason for today's particular brand of seething vitriol was this. They were at a festival. Not just any festival, a goddamn theater festival that celebrated kabuki of all god-awful things. Really, working with Kumadori for so many years had pretty much killed any appreciation you could have ever had for the art. Kumadori was dancing and yo-yoing around the place and having the time of his life. Lucci was wondering where he could best hide the body. The island was quite modern and well equipped with various amenities, but it prided itself on the preservation of its culture. They were probably best known for their theaters where they performed various types of entertainment. Kabuki and some other traditional styles were the order of the day for this festival. Hence Kumadori being more excitable than usual. Khalifa, probably being the one person with the most common sense, suggested that they split up to do their own thing and meet back at their lodgings for dinner. They agreed, everyone wanting a break from Kumadori, who along with being louder and more dramatic than usual was exceedingly popular with the locals. He was soon accepting invites to meet various famous actors and visit backstage or several renowned theaters. Lucci admitted to himself, and not anyone else, that, to his great surprise, he was quite enjoying himself. He had lots of practice in ignoring swooning fangirls so they didn't get in his way. The one who had been stupid enough to try and latch onto him was left in a gibbering wreck on the pavement, which just served to brighten his day. He saw a few plays and enjoyed a lunch in a rather upscale restaurant modeled somewhat on a traditional tea house. He bumped into Khalifa and Kaku in the same theater, so they saw Yotsuya Kaden together. Lucci had to admit that the theater troupes were excellent in this town, and it was much easier to appreciate it in the absence of Kumadori, who they kept hearing reports of during day. It seemed that there was not a production in town that he did not visit, but that only proved to be exceedingly strange as none of them saw him all day. They wisely chose not to complain, relishing the relative quiet and each personally swearing to never visit a place like this with Kumadori in tow ever again. Everyone had explored the festival and enjoyed it in their own way, which is a polite way of saying that Jabura did his best to get completely shit-faced on the local beer, which didn't quite manage to match up to the constitution of a zone-type, CP9 trained agent. They had all gathered in the sitting room of the suite that they were sharing when Kumadori burst in with a flurry of pink hair and yukata. Yo, rejoice my comrades, for I have returned. Lucci merely sipped his coffee and Bluno rustled his paper. Kumadori ignored this rather lackluster welcome and continued on, accompanying his speech with a quite frankly bizarre dance. I have been fortunate enough as to obtain tickets to the hottest show in town. Jabura looked up in interest. You got us into an erotic play. Khalifa kicked him, more for idiocy than anything else. That's UAL harassment. Kumadori waved the tickets undeterred. It is the premiere of a new show by the Black Bird Troupe. Kaku lifted the tickets from Kumadori's hands. I heard of this. Everyone seemed to be talking about it today. Someone told me that it's been sold out for 6 months. Khalifa examined her ticket closely. A puppet show. Rather childish, don't you think? Bluno handed her a section of his paper. They are rather famous. They perform quite amazing and intricate shows favoring the kabuki style apparently. Fukuro unzipped his mouth. The troupe leader has a reputation as a sadistic genius. Chapapa. He destroys his puppets and makes them bleed in order to make the show more realistic. Chapapa. Apparently, he takes advantage of how there are things normal actors cannot do. Chapapa. While Khalifa perused the article, Kaku looked towards Lucci and Jabura hopefully, who both seemed interested, well, as interested as Lucci would seem in something that didn't involve him inflicting large amounts of pain upon another human being. How did you get the tickets anyway? Queried Lucci, which was his way of saying, I want to go but I have no patience for your idiocy. They were a gift, yo, from a young man who noted that I bore a striking resemblance to one of the actors. Wisely enough, no one replied to that, and it was settled that they would go to the show that evening. The tickets were excellent. Their seats gave them the perfect view and were situated so that they could see all possible escape routes and possible venues of attack. Lucci wondered vaguely if that was intentional but dismissed it quickly. Whoever had given them the tickets was right. The puppet that served as announcer and narrator was a melodramatic one in gaudy red clothes and long white hair. It introduced itself as Jiraiya the Toad Sage of Mount Myobokuzen. It was so much like Kumadori it was scary. The puppet introduced the play as the Gutsy Ninja and the Kyuubi no Yuko. The puppetry was unbelievably good in the play, while incredibly violent and thrilling, had excellent characters and writing. Everyone enjoyed it immensely, and when the puppeteer came out to take a bow he received a standing ovation. As it turned out, their tickets let them into the backstage. He puppeteer, clad in black with purple face paint in the kabuki style, greeted them casually and invited them to the after party. While he offered, he wiped off his face paint and removed his hood, causing Kumadori to freak out and attempt seppuku again. It transpired that he had been the one that gave Kumadori the tickets, but the former CP9 agent didn't recognize him in his stage clothes. The man shrugged and introduced himself as Konkuro. The party was energetic with the entire theater troupe in high spirits. There were several more guests invited by other actors and stagehands, so no one paid the former agents any unnecessary attention, except for Kumadori, who everyone assumed was the inspiration for the narrator character Jiraiya. Konkuro was a broad-built man, one who looked more suited to the life of a laborer or prize fighter rather than an actor. He had demonstrated some of the puppet's functions to Kaku, who was inordinately interested in the intricate mechanisms. He refused to show them how exactly he operated, though saying that everyone had secrets. He gave them a meaningful look then that spoke volumes. He knew who they were, but more importantly he didn't give a damn about it. They weren't a government-sanctioned killing machine anymore. Caution was necessary if they wanted to avoid attention. So it fell to Khalifa to approach him. Just what do you mean by secrets? He snorted and guffawed. Lady, don't kid a kidder. No matter how good you are obvious and easily identifiable to a person like me. She shifted her stance slightly as her comrades subtly prepared to fight if necessary. An actor, an assassin, a pause. They hadn't expected that. Kankuro took a sip of his drink. I'd say you trained from very early on in life for a military force. Easy money, you specialized in some sort of covert ops. This man, he claimed to discern all of that from just seeing them. Lucci caught the other's eyes. They were prepared to fight their way out. Even if he was technically a civilian, they would need to cover their tracks. My father, he continued undeterred, was, along with being a grade 1 bastard, a general. In my homeland, you are trained to kill as soon as you can walk. The ways of shadow, subterfuge, spying and murder were a simple way of life for us. You betrayed him, Kaku ventured. I hated my father, Kankuro admitted, but I loved my country. He poured himself another drink and offered the pitcher to Jabura. Everything's gone though, so it doesn't matter. I don't do that sort of thing anymore, and I never had any interest either. I watched my little brother suffer and die because of that man before watching our entire world burn because of the legacy of men like that. Lucci growled. Why did you approach us? The younger man stared at him flatly, entirely unafraid. Such an unremarkable appearance, but a core of pure steel. One who was tempered and forged in war. The thought flitted across Lucci's mind, and he realized that this man would not betray them or join them. He was neither their ally nor their friend, just a passing acquaintance with a professional interest who would forget them as soon as they left. The truth is, he indicated Kumadori, that guy really reminded me of Jiraiya. Bluno raised an eyebrow. Isn't he a character in your play? He was real. I met him. He hummed. Great man, but a damn weird bastard. Genius at information gathering and no slouch on the battlefield either. Kaku grinned. Weird how? Kankuro returned the grin and told them about an aspiring writer and a super pervert. The party went on all night before finally winding down. The former agents got ready to leave, planning on moving on to their next destination on their personal mission. Kankuro showed them out of the theater, yawning and scratching all the way. He gave Kumadori a book as a gift. Yo, what's this? A book. The Legend of the Gutsy Ninja. That super pervert wrote it before he switched to pornographic literature. He squinted groggily at the twilight, grumbling under his breath, clearly wishing to be back in bed. You know, you'll probably run into others from my homeland, he mused. They won't start anything with you, but they might have a little professional curiosity, like myself. Jabura grunted. Professional what? Kankuro smirked. In the dull dawn, with mist swirling around them, they saw just a hint of his true nature. This man, while apparently retired and uninterested in their activities, was extremely deadly. In that moment he rivaled Lucci at his height and yet possessed something more sinister. Lucci would kill you. Kankuro would make you die slowly after destroying everything you hold dear. He had done this with the full expectation that he would do it until he died. A ruthless assassin from the shadows that didn't understand sympathy for his victims. They saw this in his eyes, his stance, his cruel smile, that he was more than a match for any of them, and if he was forced to fight, it would be by no rules but his own. A ninja, those from the hidden villages of the shinobi. When Nami asked Sakura why she didn't run away, she replied, how far would I get before I was brought back? When Sanji called her Sakura-chan, she burst into tears. Sanji was mortified and groveled for forgiveness. She told the crew that everyone who addressed her like that had died painful deaths in her arms calling her name. She didn't want to remember them like that. Sanji either used Saku-koi or Sakura-swan. He also referred to her as the budding flower of the cherry blossom tree and said that he hoped to see it bloom once more. Sakura had a weakness for Chopper. He was a little jealous and apprehensive of her at first, but soon warmed up to her. He coaxed her into talking about medical practice and shared stories from his own life. He told her about the man he considered a father, all that he had left him, and the dream he discovered. There is no illness that cannot be cured, he said. Sakura hugged him and whispered that he was so much stronger than her. She then told him about a vain drunken gambler that had taken her as an apprentice. Zoro bluntly asked her why she dyed her hair. Sanji called him a marimo and attacked him while Luffy scrutinized her closely, having not realized this. She said that once long hair had been a sign of her love, but then she realized that for her it was a mark of her weakness. Her true color was vibrant and rich, but she felt that while she mourned, her vanity was not something she would pander to. Nami could not convince her to wear anything other than the baggy black clothes she chose. She tried every trick in her encyclopedic book of tricks, manipulations and cons, but nothing worked. She resorted to stealing every item of clothing that Sakura owned, but all that succeeded in doing was making Sakura stay in her room permanently. No one could convince her to come out wearing anything else. Chopper eventually went in and talked to her privately with the door shut. Zoro told Nami in a matter-of-fact manner that while he understood that she meant well and dressing in nice clothes made her feel good, Sakura had yet to forgive herself for the deaths of her comrades. She kept herself clean. That was a good starting point for someone of her psychological status, but they could not push her no matter how frustrated they were. Chopper came out and solemnly asked Nami for the clothes back, and she produced them. In the next port, Nami bought Sakura an extra-large snug black jumper with a hood. It was long enough to pass as a dress and had lots of pockets. Sakura had a super strength technique that she had learned on her medical apprenticeship. She was afraid of it. She remembered the damage she had done with it when stacked against the precious lives she failed to save. For a long time, she avoided battle, helping Nami to man to ship instead. When it happened that Chopper had been caught in a seastone net and Usopp took a bad hit trying to untangle him, she snapped. She threw their attackers through the air and smashed open a fissure in the ground with her fist. Her eyes glowed and her aura was terrifying. Do not lay a hand on any of my nakama. Robin was the sort of woman that Sakura always wanted to be. She had the appeal of a mature woman that Sakura had so desired as a young child. She looked up to Robin immensely and enjoyed her composed personality. Robin told her about the workings of the Marines, the world government and the Cipher Pole. Then she told her about the great age of piracy that they were living in, of the Pirate King, the Yonko and the Shichibukai. Sakura really looked up to Robin, but she knew that the woman held as many, if not more secrets as her own. She told her such and admitted that she had seen great men and women suffer because of an accident of birth. They called him demon because he existed. Quote, Robin had no response for that. Sakura had chronic nightmares. She would sit up all night because of them. She only really rested when she was exhausted enough to have a dreamless sleep. More than once she woke up screaming different names and begging for forgiveness and to die herself. It soon became routine for her to go sit with whoever was on watch. She often sat up and read with Robin, who did it out of habit. Some nights she didn't even bother going to bed but merely sat up all night. Every member of the crew had comforted her after waking from a nightmare at least once. Chopper fretted and Zoro scowled, but as things were, she was not in a place that they could help. Sanji ran the kitchen with an iron fist and black boot. No one stole from his pantry without feeling his wrath. His angels were welcome to any time they choose, and everyone followed dish duty. Sakura insisted on helping with it every single day, much to his dismay. He tried to convince Sakura Swan not to bother herself and to let him or one of the bastards handle it. I can't do much. Let me do this. Even if it's something small and insignificant, I want to contribute. Sanji bullied one of the idiots into helping her and told her to make sure they followed her instructions. When planning a trip onto an island, Zoro asked if she was strong enough to lift boxes of a certain weight. She looked puzzled for a minute before explaining the exact nature of her strength technique. She compared it to having a fuel tank filled with extremely reactive chemical. She didn't simply pump up her muscles, she used her body to guide the destructive force of her chakra while protecting herself from backlash. She could actually use it to lift heavy objects, but it wasted far more energy than any of the other members of the crew. The strength that you possess is real, true physical power. It's far superior to my techniques in that sense. Zoro nodded, comprehending and inwardly marveling at the complexity of such techniques she used. Then he looked at her oddly when she mused that it was easier to swing someone around than to lift them like weights. Every day, Chopper and Sakura studied together. They shared medical techniques and knowledge. He taught her about the herbs and illnesses in their world, and she taught him about her medical techniques. He was extremely discouraged seeing them, thinking they were far superior than anything he could hope to achieve. Sakura sharply told him that they were more dangerous than anything and would do more harm than good if used irresponsibly. She explained in detail the truth behind the techniques, and he was horrified. That would destroy your body in no time. That is why it serves as a last resort. It was invented to get soldiers back onto the field as soon as possible. There is no consideration for long-term consequences. These healing techniques are only for situations of certain death when all other viable options are exhausted. Fortunately, the poison extraction technique didn't have such major complications, but it would send a body into shock if applied incorrectly. Sometimes, Sakura would have a bad day. She would stay in bed and refuse to move. She would stare blankly into space and refuse to eat. She shut herself off from the world and grieved. When she was first press ganged by Luffy, this happened at least once a week. One time, she had been in that state for a solid week and everyone was getting frantic. Luffy had stood up, walked into the bedroom and placed his hat on her head. "Sakura, this hat is my treasure. It was given to me by my hero who asked me to return it to him when I become a great pirate. I take very good care of it and have kicked the ass of guys who disrespected my treasure. You are my nakama and just as important to me as Zoro, Chopper or Mary. I can't survive on my own, I know that. So I have my precious nakama and we all support each other." She looked at him in surprise. "Luffy, Nihi, you're a member of this crew too, Sakura." She burst into tears and wept on his shoulder until she fell asleep. She improved after that. Zoro noted that she had begun to show signs that she could recover. Luffy called it a mystery illness. Nami sighed and explained that losing all of her previous nakama had hurt her heart badly and she felt that she had failed them. Luffy took this simply to mean that they couldn't lose, because Sakura didn't want to lose any more nakama. Her bad days grew less frequent and improved from catatonia to chronic depression. It was still pretty bad to see and the others worried, but when she patted Chopper on the head and smiled softly, they knew that she would take the time she needed and get there in her own time. One morning, everyone got up and had forgotten who they were. Robin, for all her wonderful qualities that Sakura admired, didn't appreciate how bad the situation was. But Sakura had heard most of everyone's history. They told her stories when she had one of her days. She took charge and quickly began hauling out evidence to support her stories dealing with their vanished memories. She showed Nami her log post, navigational journal, the Mikan trees, her photo of Nojiko with Belmere-san and had her look at her tattoo. Nami was shocked but forced to concede it was the truth when she saw the new symbol on her arm. She had Zoro look at the swords that were with Wado and told him of their history. She also told him briefly of some of his accomplishments, including being acknowledged by Mihawk, as evidenced by the scar, before wagging his hefty bounty in his face, taunting him, "Are you going to collect this bounty hunter?" She sweetly sent Sanji down to the kitchen and he discovered how it was kept just as he liked it. She told him of their journey and his dream before complimenting his cooking and giving him a hug for good measure. She told Usopp some of his history, showed him some of the tools he'd made recently and informed him that the Going Merry had been a gift from Kaya. He was still slightly skeptical, but her information about his family clinched the deal. She complimented Chopper and gave him a hug, whispering something in his ear. He teared up and looked at her in admiration, which turned to surprise when she said, "The best doctor I have ever known told me that. And you were right, Chopper-sensei." She simply told Luffy and he believed her, idiot, but she gave him his bounty poster so she and Robin Neeson could be entertained by his reaction. When everything was back to normal, the others couldn't help being impressed by her take-charge attitude. She had assessed the situation and quickly acted to protect her nakama. According to the information from the locals, this was the last island before approaching Water 7 where they could get their ship repaired. Sakura had marched off the ship purposely and called that if she didn't return for dinner then someone had damn well better fetch her. Sanji had just finished preparing dinner when a woman strode onto the ship. She wore knee-length shorts with a medic skirt over it. She wore her old shoes but now they could be seen clearly. She topped off her outfit with a red t-shirt, elbow guards and black gloves. Her luminous pink bob was tied back with a red ribbon. "Oi," said Luffy, "who the hell are you?" She smacked him on the head. "That's not very nice, Luffy, especially when you made me join your crew." He gawked. "Ah, Sakura, what happened to your black jumper?" She sighed and Nami shook her head. "It suits you, Sakura-ne. That outfit just seems more you." Sanji was in full-on Melorine mode so his opinion was clear. "So, that's your real hair color," Zoro mused. "Your parents had a sense of humor, huh?" "You know it," she jauntily replied. Chopper was awestruck. His friend, his nakama, his colleague Sakura was like a walking reminder of Hilruk. Sakura smiled at him and cleared her throat. I've troubled you with my problems for so long. If it hadn't been for you I wouldn't have survived at all. I've seen war, and the many terrible things that men can do. I never want to see one of my friends die like that again. I don't want to be a hindrance. I still have a long way to go, but please, she flushed, let me support you too. My dream is to see my nakama go all the way. Luffy grinned. Nay, you know what this means, guys. We've got to welcome Sakura to the crew properly. Kampai. Kankuro missed his little brother. When he was younger he had feared him, but as he grew into that fine leader that was so widely celebrated he was immensely proud of his deep persona, strength and the trust that he so willingly bestowed upon an undeserving older brother. There were times where they would sit up all night while Kankuro worked with his puppets. No need for talk, just enjoying the comforting proximity of a trusted brother. The first time Gaara died he thought he had died too. He finally had the chance to be a proper older brother and he had screwed it up. He had to let someone else help him. Kankuro and Temari had watched Gaara sleep that night. They couldn't do anything for their little brother. It was a different kind of despair. At the end, he had smiled. Full of love and forgiveness. Letting them know in his own way. I understand. When he settled on that island, he wrote a play. His first of many. It told of madness, blood, death and redemption. Mutual friends. Despite being a Shichibukai, Jinbei visited Whitebeard frequently. These visits were never particularly long but always enjoyed. Jinbei was a serious and stoic individual, but everyone liked and respected him. Sometimes it was just the two captains and other times the commanders were invited to join them. They would swap information, never gossip because they were big manly pirates who did not gossip, and have a general grand old time. Jinbei came to them with a story about some interesting individuals he met. Two young men he suspected to be part fishman and a beautiful woman who accompanied them. He spoke highly of their skills and honor. They possessed strange abilities, and if they hadn't been so at home in the seawater he would have taken them for fruit users. Marco knew immediately who the woman was and absently wondered if she was in the area. Thatch had laughed, demanding a description of them, so take advantage if a chance to see these abilities arose. Jinbei obliged, and Ace remarked carelessly that the woman sounded like a major babe. The 1st Division commander was simultaneously surprised and apprehensive when Jinbei turned to him and gravely announced that he had a message that she had given him to pass on to him. Not here, not here, not here, not here, he chanted internally while struggling to keep his face calm, praying that it was written and purposely avoiding the eyes of the others. Ah, that's so, he drawled. Jinbei nodded regally. She said to ask you whether you decided to keep the belt, Tori-san. Marco cursed as he saw the predatory expressions appear on the faces of his nakama. She did that deliberately, he just knew it. Popular. Sasuke was popular. He always had been, even when he was busy being an insane evil bastard. He despised it as a child, fumed about it as a teen, and adored it now. To be fair, it was a different type of popularity than it was back then. It had been brainless little girls who wanted to heal him, and pedophilic old men, but now it was pirates. Granted, he still got the occasional stupid girl, but he had 20 years of experience in getting rid of them. Sasuke loved pirates and they loved him back. He had been invited to join every crew he encountered, and admittedly only a few had tempted him. He was sure it was some kind of record. He was quite proud of that fact. When he met Shanks there had been a bash of truly epic proportions. Apparently they had several mutual acquaintances, and this was grounds for a week-long shindig. Sasuke had simply bowed down and called him the Partymaster Supreme, really liking the way Shanks thought. They parted ways eventually, with Shanks acquiring the rare and unique knowledge of Sasuke's entire life. There was only one other person alive who knew it, and Sasuke hadn't seen that cycloptic pervert in years. The ultimate expression of love. Polly loved to gamble. The only problem was that he had not one iota of common sense when it came to his funds. It was okay when it was just him, but he was ashamed that Shizune had to deal with his problems too, even if she had spent the better part of her life doing that for another person. But Polly had pride and he couldn't be a financial burden upon her. They shared an apartment now, and with his promotion at work he shouldn't be having any trouble with funds, but he was, and Shizune had to pay more than her fair share of the bills more than once. He knew that it would be difficult enough to muster enough confidence to ask her what he had been thinking about for the last while, so he needed to clear the decks in order to ensure he wouldn't be distracted. It was humiliating, but he knew it was necessary. He wouldn't do this for anyone else except maybe Iceberg San, but since it was Shizune he would suck it up and take it like a man. She had burst into tears and cried about how it was what she had always wanted, but Tsunade-sama had been too stubborn and she was terrified of hurting his pride, which was the last thing she wanted to do. She leapt into his arms and that had been the end of their dinner plans. Most people would have considered it the height of folly, but for them it was okay. She sorted it out fairly quickly and fixed it so no one could lend him money without her as co-signatory. He still had a bundle of cash to gamble with, but he no longer ran short for necessities. Shizune was so happy she was glowing, which led to rumors that she was pregnant, but the couple failed to pick up on them. It was strange, but it was all right for them. Giving over legal control of your financial affairs in their entirety was their ultimate expression of love. Ramen. Sakura loved ramen. It reminded her of home, of long-gone friends and security, and of one of the best human beings she had ever had the fortune to know. She knew that she couldn't eat it all the time. For one thing, that would be a grave insult to Sanji's 9-star cooking, and another, you had to be very conscious of healthy eating while out at sea. But, on that anniversary she caved. She went to Sanji and told him flat out that it was her way to honor that anniversary, so it had to be ramen. Sanji understood the importance of food. The others were bemused, but they understood that this was important for Sakura, and Sanji had offered to help. For as long as they traveled together, on that day he would cook as much ramen as could be eaten, and just for that one day he would call her Sakura-kwan. There was only one female member of the Kid Pirates. A supple, deadly killing machine that fought with an unknown martial art. Deceptively graceful and ballistic, it was a brutal and cruel style. How an opponent died was subject to her whims. She was a woman with a poisonous caress. When she first joined the crew she publicly battered a man to death, tormenting him until he begged for her to kill him. She refused to comply, and in the end Killer had slit his throat for bleeding on the deck unnecessarily. It was once whispered that she was the strongest on the ship and could easily overthrow Kid as captain. Her response to this came later when they battled a group of marine captains. A particularly tenacious fellow who appeared to have an axe to grind rather publicly challenged her. She regarded him flatly and turned to Kid. "Captain." He grinned ferally and told her to go wild, upon which she promptly tore the man apart. This was significant, as she had very publicly deferred to his rank and position as captain. The fleeing Marines reported on her power, skill and loyalty to Captain Eustace Kidd. It wasn't Kidd who had recruited her actually, but Killer. The exact details of this were unknown by anyone except for Killer, Kidd and the Hyuga women. Some thought that she had seduced him or he her, others that she was secretly his human slave. The more common belief was that Kidd has assigned him to press gang her and then to keep her on a short leash. One person suggested that it had something to do with them both being warriors, but most dismissed this as ridiculous. She was deathly loyal. She proved it time and time again. Killer had brought her own board, but she gladly followed Kidd. He had tested her frequently in the beginning. He sent her after the most random opponents in battle and made her fetch him refills in bars. He accused her of various things and she calmly responded to each of his questions, never getting annoyed. Her cool demeanor frustrated him and he challenged her, demanding to know why she would agree to follow him when her loyalty had been won by Killer. "You are the captain," she replied. "Besides, what makes you think that you haven't won my loyalty since then?" After that, she was usually part of his escort with Killer and the others. She dressed well but absolutely never showed off her skin. Her clothes were always tight enough to flatter and entice but loose enough for a more fluid movement. She would restrain her long hair under a hood and cover her face with an animal skull. The skull got replaced from time to time and she seemed to function with it just fine. It went unsaid that she wore it for intimidation factor. Her soft creamy skin and beautiful features didn't exactly encourage terror in opponents. Lots of other emotions but rarely the one she was looking for. Kidd guffawed and said that she and Killer were in the same club for murderous mask-wearing aficionados. It was frequently thought that she and Killer were lovers. The fact that they shared a room was the main reason for this. They weren't though, and Kidd could testify to this, for he liked to burst into the room at odd hours to check for blackmail opportunities. He had never so much as caught them sharing a bed. The most interesting thing he had ever seen was them seated at opposite ends of a small table cleaning and sharpening weaponry. She took his dagger, cleaned and sharpened it for him before returning it. The primary reason for their sharing a room boiled down to that she couldn't sleep in the dorms with the crewmen, no matter how many of them she terrorized in good behavior, and the only people who had their own room was Killer and the captain. They obtained a hammock and it seemed to go well. She slept in the hammock except for when Killer had night watch, then she would borrow his bed instead. Once, they ran into a presumably blind young man who addressed her politely as Kusen. The kid pirates were suspicious. They had spotted him walking on top of the water after all, but she had seemed quite pleased to see him and pleaded with Kid to let him come on board. Kid actually quite liked the man with the stupid-looking duck-ass haircut, who drank like a fish and told wonderfully entertaining stories about battles, blood and other pirates that he met. Kid suspected that Killer was a little bit jealous of him but decided not to call him on it this time. The Hyuga woman and he discussed mutual acquaintances, who had survived, who hadn't and who they had killed for this mysterious oath. They parted ways the next day with Sasuke bowing deeply to them, promising to buy the drinks next time and addressing her as Haim. The oath was a mysterious subject. Killer knew what it was and admitted that he had pledged to help her fulfill the final stage as a mark of respect, but he refused to tell Kid what it was, saying that he would find out later anyway. Kid knew it involved death in some way and wondered if her dedication to it surpassed her loyalty to the crew. She never really talked about her life before her battle with Killer on that island and those eyes. She said that it was something in her blood and not a devil fruit. He admitted that she had proved it often enough. He had tried but ultimately failed to learn her trick for running on top of the water. Which really pissed him off, but he'd have to live with it. She had plunged into the water after him and hauled him out before he had been in long enough to get his coat wet. Her first bounty had been a spectacular 80 million belly, received for obliterating a marine base with that oh-so-marvelous Kaden of hers. Kid had been thrilled for several reasons. The first being that it was lower than his, the second being how she was noted for being extremely loyal to the Kid pirates. They celebrated the third bounty in their crew, the one the Marines had dubbed Hand of God. By the time they reached Sabayati, they were the only crew with 3 supernovas, for which Kid was inordinately smug. When she took night watch, she didn't climb the crow's nest. She practiced katas on the deck under the moonlight. She would dance on top of the seawater, sending glittering sprays through the air. New members swore to seeing mermaids, nymphs and goddesses dancing on the tides before they were set straight by their nakama. This usually involved letting her beat them into oblivion for spreading rumors. Occasionally Killer would take night detail too, and they would have a light touch spar on the deck. Their elegant and flowing styles meshed well together. While everyone was respected to fight their own battles, they were an excellent double team and known as Kid's enforcers due to their brutal and unwavering loyalty to the up-and-coming rookie. They had moored on a small island for the night and weren't expecting anything interesting. In fact, Kid was downright bored and contemplating killing the more worthless and disrespectful of the new recruits. Hyuga was twitchy. That alone was reason enough for concern. She always kept her cool, even in the heat of battle. Killer and she were alike in that if one of them was visibly worried, then shit was definitely going to go down. She kept making the hand symbol for her eyes and checking the area as if she was expecting something. This in turn led to the other main members of the crew being on guard, and the minor crewmen scurrying to get out of their way. It all came to a head when she bounded over the rail and dashed down the beach to confront a haggard-looking blonde that had emerged from the foliage. They barely exchanged a few words before hurling themselves into a ferocious and bloody battle. Her nakama prepared to back her up if necessary when a dark-skinned man with hair covering one of his eyes perched on the edge of their ship and told them to keep out of it. Kid was displeased, and this usually meant that someone was going to die. One of his crew was involved in a fight and he was being ordered to back off. The latter part was what was pissing him off more. He knew she could handle herself, but the situation just seemed off to him. It wasn't some kind of bar fight, and Roger knows that they got into enough of those. The crazy-looking blonde was a man with a purpose. If he had to guess, some kind of assassin. A Hyuga is more than capable of handling themselves, the stranger drawled. Don't want to disrespect her by interfering, you know. Killer, who had positioned himself within easy reach of the man, kept his masked face trained on the battle. Is that man a comrade of yours? He was. The burly man tilted his head and his expression held a flash of what seemed to be regret, but the guy the first knew is long gone. I've been tracking him. Killer turned to him. To fulfill your oath, right? The man started and let his indolent expression slip from his face. Did that girl tell you about that? Hun, Kunoichi always were pretty unpredictable. He stood up. He got away from me, but if she doesn't put an end to it, I will. There's nothing left there. That was she. Censor types never survive the trip sane. Her opponent, now identified as she, was insane. You didn't need the exposition to see that. He was drooling and moving in an awkward manner. He ranted about demons, blood and unnatural things. She seemed to have trouble pinning him down. His movements were too damn erratic to be predictable. She ducked and weaved before attempting a Yuho Soshiken. She grinned and took it head on. She paused minutely, surprised by his actions, and quickly tried to move back, hindered by his grip on her arm. The explosion was ferocious. Darui and the pirates leapt over the railing and rushed to the site. Kid shouted out, hoping to locate the sole girl on their crew. Hinata, oi, where are you? Kid, I hear coughing. Killer muttered before zeroing in on a point. The smoke cleared and the hunched female could be seen struggling to get to her feet. The massacre man moved to her side, but the other men halted in surprise. Hinata was an extremely attractive woman. Her soft, porcelain features and strange pale eyes could have painted her as a princess. She had a wonderfully curved figure, one that had triggered plenty of bar fights with those stupid enough not to back off when she told them to, with a crew full of infamous pirates to her back, all of whom were itching for a fight. She always covered up. From neck to ankle to wrist was always covered by her clothing. Tight enough to flatter, loose enough to conceal and allow freedom of movement. She had caught the edge of the explosion that she triggered. She had succeeded in protecting herself to a certain extent, but her clothing was torn away. The shards of the animal skull she wore were scattered around her feet, exposing the bulging veins of her Byakugan. Her hair was mussed and singed, partially freed from her bun. Most of body was exposed. She had adjusted the remains to cover the important parts, but her flesh was clearly visible to the men. Someone had taken a knife to her. There were tortoise patterns carved into her flesh with artistic flair. Swirling patterns were cut into every inch of her skin by some kind of instrument. There were parts of the pattern where it seemed that whoever did it had gotten bored and simply ripped over a chunk of her tissue. Judging from his reaction, Killer obviously knew. He quickly stripped his shirt and passed it to her. She nodded in thanks, put it on and tore back into the fray. Killer, Kid began, only for his first mate to shake his head. Not now. She tore into the lunatic with a renewed fervor, overwhelming his healing abilities and laying him out flat before signaling to Darui, who efficiently removed his head. They burnt the body and scattered the ashes before everyone returned to the ship. The place we came from, Hinata began, no longer exists. It was destroyed through the legacy of men. Those of us that survived the wars and the demonic plague found a doorway. Darui sipped his drink before taking over. We knew it would be dangerous, but no one cared. Everyone just wanted a clean start somewhere else. The oath we swore was part of that desire. So that the horrors of our homeland are not recreated in this place. Kid glowered sulkily. Killer had already known this but had not seen fit to tell him. So that man, she. Killer interjected. Ah, a former comrade. He possessed inherent, sensing abilities. A side effect of them is that anyone who passed through the door lost their mind. We have no other option but to put them down like animals when we discover them. We didn't come here to babysit our invalids. Hinata had failed to obtain a replacement mask. Her luminous eyes bored into her allies. It wasn't just them though. Those who lacked resistance to the poison, or carried any kind of inhibitive seal would fall. They'd either die or go insane. That's how I lost my remaining family members. The last Hyuga then, commented Darui. She smiled bitterly. Silence reigned, the secretive duo implying that they had reached the limits of what they were going to reveal at this juncture. Kid sighed in annoyance, his feet propped up on his desk. Fine, whatever. You've already proved that you're one of us, Hyuga. You though, he pointed his finger at Darui, can get thee off my ship. Darui took this in good graces anyway. He shrugged as if he expected that and politely bid farewell to Hinata before taking his leave. Where he went from there, the kid pirates didn't know, and they didn't think that even Hinata cared. Once he was gone, Kid turned his eyes on Hinata, the unspoken question hovering in the air. She didn't look particularly thrilled about telling the story, but killer hovering like a particularly vicious guard dog seemed to fortify her. I was captured. There was a war and my platoon was attacked. I was taken hostage by a group afflicted with the madness. They tortured me, among other things, for about a week. My cousin and his team rescued me. It had only been chance actually. They were returning from a mission of their own. No one said anything. The facts were right in front of them and the words were hanging unspoken in the air. Insane men torturing a woman, you'd have to be a fool not to see the obvious. But she was sane, healthy and strong. An invaluable member of the crew. If she wanted to conceal those scars, it was her own business. Tenten loved her life. Granted, she had been perfectly happy before it had all started, but that was something far beyond her control. She was a woman who had gained everything through sheer dedication and hard work. As a student, she had always been somewhat embarrassed by the behavior of the majority of girls in the academy. Most of them seemed to spend their time obsessing over their appearance and the better-looking boys, particularly the Uchiha brat and Neji. She couldn't admit to being completely innocent of crushing on either of them or desiring their attention, but she never slacked off on her training for something like that. Sure, they were cute. Tenten always appreciated an attractive individual, she no reason not to, but she admired their dedication and skills far more than anything else. Morning to night she trained, pushing herself further and further every single day. She studied everything about all weapons and learned the basics of every single one. Sure, she could throw a kunai, but very few realized that she could take down most people in a knife fight, capture damn near anybody with a kusarigama and use tonfas like you wouldn't believe. In fact, she had been the one to teach Lee the nunchaku. Her determination was to be one of the best, to become a shining example of a powerful and accomplished female ninja. Guy Sensei, for all his eccentricities, and man, were there a lot, was an excellent teacher. Neji looked down on everyone and Lee was fixated, but he got them to work together as professional ninjas right from the get-go. Honestly, she probably missed him more than anyone else. Other genins used to give her pitying looks, but she couldn't imagine a better sensei than Guy. He had heard from other groups about the training they got. Kurenai Senpai had been respectable, but copy Enin Hitaki Kakashi. What a joke. She was glad that she had a sensei that had practically adopted them straight away and took an interest in everything about their lives. She remembered resenting Sakura-san for training under Tsunade-san, especially after that dismal performance she had given with the Yamanaka girl, but she would never had traded the unwavering support of Guy-sensei for anyone else, even Tsunade-sama. After everything was over, she had no idea as to what to do. Her entire life had been dedicated to becoming a fantastic ninja before fate decided to rudely yank the rug from underneath her feet. Konoha was gone. Fire Country was decimated. There wasn't anywhere in the world that was safe from that. Old allegiances meant nothing and the oath had become everything. The random nature of the door ensured that the chances of fate seizing upon a final chance to you over was extremely high. This was probably why she ended up in the ocean. However, luck decided to give her a break and washed her up on shore where she was rescued. Tenten was thrilled. Now, she loved men. Quite a fan in fact, especially of the strong and skilled variety, but she had spent her entire life struggling to become a respected female warrior. To find herself welcomed into an entire society based around that concept was a dream come true for the young woman. Hockey was completely different from anything she had ever known. Killing intent was probably the closest she had experienced before, and she had plenty of experience when it came to throwing that about. It didn't take her too long to pick it up, and training with her new family quickly brought her up to speed. Her oath specified certain things about her ninja skills, but there was provisions in it for chakra use. She could teach them the use and certain basic skills, but no jutsus. To go beyond that would ensure that she would be hunted down mercilessly as a traitor to the oath, and she couldn't endanger them against opponents who could and would employ assassination jutsu against them. They discovered that while she could learn hockey, they could not learn to employ their chakra. They succeeded in teaching some of the children though. It seemed that adults were too established in certain ways to be able to properly manipulate the fusion of energy. She showed them the water walking and tree climbing exercise. It was certainly not a substitute for anything else, but for aspiring pirates it was a good skill to hold in reserve. The lack of men was an adjustment, one that she made and moved on with. But their astounding lack of knowledge regarding men was simultaneously terrifying and hilarious. She applied to Hebihime-sama and begged to give lecture on the topic. The Empress was displeased, but Tenten managed to convince her with phrases such as, "Know thy enemy," and "Wars are won on information." It was a massive success, and Tenten, not being the flighty romantic type, equipped everyone with the basic knowledge, both good and bad, that most people took for granted. At least they knew what marriage was now. How could they not know what marriage was? Ninja, pirate, whatever. The only difference Tenten found was that there was a hell a lot more water. Her new comrades were so powerful, it was a thrill and an honor to fight alongside them. They were more inclined to raid for supplies, but Tenten was gratified when Hebihime rewarded her with a chance to display her skills by destroying a ship that ventured into their territory. She rained haki and forced steel upon the ship before ripping them all back with her chakra string technique. Her Soshoryu technique was one that had gained her prestige and reputation in the wars. When she completed her technique and there was nothing left of her opponent, she was congratulated by the other members of the crew. Tenten flushed at their praise and promised to share her technique and weapon style with those that had asked to attempt it. They had taken her in and shared their techniques. Of course she was going to share what she knew. Amazon Lily was her home and she would defend it and follow Hebihime-sama for the rest of her days. They prepared to move on, but everyone was halted by the expression on the faces of their beloved Gorgon sisters. The beautiful face of the pirate Empress Boa Han was the last thing that Tenten saw. She never knew why. Father was away on a mission. He wasn't allowed to train until he came back to supervise. The boy was sure that the mission was important. He still would have liked to practice his katas at the very least, but this place wasn't secure and it could give enemies too good a chance to study the hake in detail. So, every day Neji sat on a chair on the porch and waited for his return. The people here were very kind. They fed him, kept him company and let him sit in the chair that afforded him the best view of the road. It was a very comfortable chair, so he appreciated that. He found walking very hard for some reason. It just made him extremely tired and enforced a terrible pain in his body. He hated noise. It had never bothered him before, but noisy things made him very upset. When people began making noise, he would get so upset that the nice people would come to make everything quiet again. Neji felt that something was not quite right, but he couldn't quite figure out what it was. He wondered if father had left him a chore to do. He couldn't remember though. He would wait until father came back and ask him then. He couldn't see as well as he should. His eyes would hurt when he stared at something for too long. He knew there was a way to see better, but he just couldn't remember how to do that. If only he could remember, then he would be able to watch for father better. Neji liked the kind lady. He wondered if she was a mother. She smiled like one. He tried to remember something about his own mother, but he couldn't. He wondered why that was, but it made him upset, so he stopped. There were other nice people, but he liked the kind lady best. She would read him a book about a nightingale. He wished that he could fly out of a cage like that bird did. Neji couldn't eat, but it was okay because the nice people would help him spoon up his rice pudding. They'd also wipe his mouth when it needed it, which was more often than you'd think. Every day Neji sat in his chair on the porch and waited for his father to return from his mission. One day, two people walked up from the town. Neji saw them from his chair on the porch. A tall, slim man that moved like a deadly predator and a grown-up woman that wore a scary mask. They both were very frightening, but they were quiet, so Neji didn't get too upset. Under her mask, the woman had the same eyes as him. She asked him what he was waiting for and he told her. He asked if she was going to take him to see his father and she said yes. The man helped him to stand and they left without saying a word to the other nice people. Neji didn't mind. He missed his father. He had been gone on a mission for a long time. He was glad this clanswoman was going to take him to see him again. It had been such a long time. He was getting tired of waiting. The light crept through the window and the room slowly brightened until it could no longer be ignored. He'd been awake with the pain all night anyway. He didn't particularly mind. Kakashi lay flat on his back with his left arm folded awkwardly across his stomach. He slowly lifted it in front of his face and deliberately curled each finger in one by one before reluctantly releasing the fist and staring intently at the pale palm hovering in front of him. Why am I still alive? Makino was a woman of routine. Every day she got up at a certain time and attended to the same morning chores. Routine was familiar and instinctual. People frequently fell into them without realizing it. The familiar sounds that constituted her morning drifted up through the floorboards and the former Junin strained to hear them all. Former what? We can never leave it behind. Always coated in blood, always failing your friends. Would they still accept you if they knew what kind of person you really were? His breath ran as deep as his frustrated body would permit. Even up here he could taste the ocean in his mouth. Which was fine by him. He would stay by the ocean for the remainder of his days. He was done with the forest. He knew that Makino would help him if he asked. Makino knew that Kakashi would only ask if he had no other choice. He still had some pride. It was the only thing he really fought for anymore. The fact that he had survived was a minor miracle. He would never fight again, but he didn't give a damn. He had long lost any reason to anyway. His goal for now was to gain basic functionality. He sighed as the sounds progressed. He couldn't really put it off any longer. No need to cause extra trouble for Makino-san. He sat up with a wince. His muscles, what little power they still retained, were barely up to this little task. Pathetic. He stayed like that for a moment, giving the blood rushing about his head time to settle before he flipped back the covers and slid his feet out to touch the floorboards. There was the usual jolt of pain from his left side when he put some pressure on that leg. His target was across the room on the dresser. It stood out against the faded pine varnish. He breathed deeply and stood up as naturally as he could. He swayed in pain but didn't fall over. The result of 6 months' worth of intensive rehabilitation. Slowly, favoring his right, he crossed the few steps to the dresser. To think that what was once a careless and irrelevant action has become an expedition to begin the day, he groused internally as he leaned against the dresser. He fumbled his eye patch before putting it on. Makino-san had helped him with it. They called it an eye patch, but it really covered most of his forehead and cheek as well. The scars didn't exactly bother him. Why inflict them upon others? Best to cover our shame and not trouble other people. He had given up the mask. It didn't matter anymore. The old allegiances were dead, no need to conceal anything from his enemies. Everyone was neutral in the end. Why hang on to grudges when hell is indiscriminate? He fumbled with the ties of his trousers. The shirt was truly the most hellish piece of clothing ever invented because he had to raise his arm to get it on, and that hurt like a. God bless Makino-san for those sandals though. No ties, nothing complicated, just slip your foot in. He gripped his walking stick and sighed. He almost felt sympathy for Danzo, but then he remembered how much he had hated the prick before turning to face his new enemy. Damn stairs. Makino looked up when Kakashi shuffled in but pretended not to notice until he had heaved himself into a comfortable chair. Good morning, Kakashi-san. Good morning, Makino-san. Every morning it was the same thing. Routine was comforting. Makino placed a plate in front of him and he smiled gratefully before beginning the arduous task of manipulating the knife and fork. That simple tasks like this could be so frustrating. He mused internally. His right hand was fully functional but very weak. His left hand was a constant riot of pain. He wondered if Obito would have lived this kind of life if they hadn't failed him. Somehow he didn't think so. It didn't suit the energetic young Uchiha who was always in a hurry even when he wasn't being perpetually late. Still, it was nice. The sounds of the village drifted in through the door, the morning light cast shadows around the settings and everything was peaceful, interrupted only by the clank of cutlery or the scratch of a pen. Kakashi knew that this kind of life was far more than he deserved. He had failed in all of his most important duties. But the memory of his beloved father always stayed his hand, no matter how tempting it would be to remove the burden from their shoulders. He wasn't even able to earn any kind of living, he felt ashamed in truth. He placed the knife and fork down neatly on his plate and sighed. It did get easier, he quickly reminded himself, even if it was an excruciatingly slow progress. It was also exhausting, he reflected as he leant back in the chair and watched Makino frown over her ledger. She cursed and rattled her abacus distractedly. He smiled inwardly. It seemed that most people hated that part of the job. Makino-san. She jumped and glanced up guiltily. Kakashi extended his hand. May I? The only sounds in the bar was the gentle clinking of dishes from Makino and the tap of the abacus in time to the scratch of his pen in the accounts. The tranquility seemed fragile somehow. I'm amazed, Kakashi-san. Makino enthused. I had no idea you were so good at with figures. Ma, I was considered a prodigy, you know. Maths was an important part of that. How long a man can live without air, how fast a kunai can travel to reach a skull 50 yards away, how many nerve receptors must be used for extracting information from an unwilling informant. He flipped a page and checked some extra figures. My parents died young, so I had to learn how to manage my finances at a young age. Makino regarded him seriously for a moment and he obligingly pretended not to notice. He rarely mentioned his past, probing wouldn't encourage him in the least. Every day the mayor Whoop Slap came to visit Hitaki Kakashi. The Konoha native knew very well that he was under observation, but he couldn't bring himself to give a damn. He did appreciate the company though, and Whoop did help him keep up with the world news. Whoop was pretty pissed when he found out that Kakashi knew several pirates, but Makino helpfully pointed out that they weren't pirates when he knew them. He didn't know that they had become pirates, and Fuchsia Village was the hometown of some of the most infamous men in the world, so who were they to judge? He strode in and commandeered a seat at the table they were sitting at, slapping the paper down on the table. He raised an eyebrow at Kakashi, who was surrounded by account books, ink and a rather abused abacus. Kakashi-san is going to do my accounts for me. He's very good at math, Makino said as way of explanation. It's really the least I could do. At least I'm up to tackling this chore. Kakashi sounded, rather than bitter, just very, very tired. When he spoke like that, the villagers saw a worrying specimen, a man who had all of the fight sucked out of him. Makino and the mayor shared a worried glance. Kakashi focused on his ink-stained fingers and the task in front of him. The ninja gasped and spluttered, trying desperately to breathe, for once real fear entering his vision. Kakashi pressed his hands over his throat, trying desperately to stem the flow of bleeding. Where was Sakura? Where was the Ing medic? This was her job. Not a menatime, oh god. He's dying and there's nothing I can do. Note again, please don't die, Obito father-sensei. Hands covered in blood. Kakashi jerked awake. He blinked blearily and looked around. He assumed, due to the cramp in his back, that he had fallen asleep in the chair again. Someone, Makino most likely, had folded a blanket over him. The account books had been stacked up and the newspaper left folded on the desk. He eyed the paper longingly, but knew that he'd be in worse pain that evening if he didn't get some exercise now. He grabbed his stick and hefted himself out of his chair, pausing for a moment when a faintness overcame him. Steeling himself and resolutely ignoring the pain in his limbs, he made his way to the door and out for his daily walk. Kakashi slowly hobbled down the road, nodding to the villagers who greeted him. He noted with sadness that there didn't really seem to be anyone younger than 25 on the island. Makino had mentioned that before. Luffy and Ace pretty much only had each other growing up. There were no other children in the village, and the majority of younger people left the island for at least a few years to find work elsewhere or to see a bit of the world. Judging by the sun, it was only early afternoon. He paused and calculated the week quickly before deciding on his route. He made his way towards the docks. The last Hitaki stopped a few times to talk to some of the villagers before reaching the waters. He paused momentarily to inhale a taste of the salty air. Growing up in Konoha had never really afforded him much chance to enjoy a sea breeze, so he always took a moment to appreciate the sharp taste of the ocean air. Never going back, remember. We swore that when the forest was raised. Too damn much. Too much blood, not even the graves, oh god, not even the memorials. The road continued along the coast up to the small building intended for weddings and funerary services. He followed it and passed it by meandering into the well-tended graveyard. He visited every other day. With no graves, or a memorial to visit, it was the closest thing he had. Most of the graves possessed familiar names, the ancestors of the townspeople. He noted a couple bearing the family name, Monkey, and reminded himself of his solemn desire to never have to deal with one Monkey D. Garp. He would never recover enough health to deal with that kind of personality again. Kakashi sat against the large memorial to those lost at sea, which included to pirates, marines and sea kings. Makino had explained to him in no uncertain terms that if that happened, Ace and Luffy would be carved onto this monolith as well. Such a short walk and already I'm tired again. Goddammit. He gazed out towards the sea and idly toyed with the idea of becoming a pirate and going to meet up with his fellow oath-bearers on the Grand Line before dismissing it. His day was done, he knew that. Let the others carve their path forward, he would stay here. To be able to live in such a peaceful place was more than he deserved. He wasn't moving either. Were they all dead? What had happened to him? Why was he acting like this? It made no sense. Those eyes, the madness, Chidori. He stood up abruptly and instantly regretted it, but gritted his teeth and swaying made his way back into town. The bar was busy as usual that evening. The ebb and flow was familiar by now and comforting in its own way. Today Kakashi had elected to sit with the mayor and work his way through the paper. He paused at one section and made a sound caught somewhere between humor, disbelief and surprise. Whoop caught his eye inquiringly and Kakashi showed him the article of a recent massacre perpetrated by the kid pirates. I knew that girl, Kakashi explained as he tapped her be-masked portrait. If you knew her as a child you'd never guess that she would have become a pirate like that. A regular timid little Ajo-sama like that. Whoop raised his eyebrow. You know a lot of damn pirates, Kakashi-san. I'm surprised myself, Mayor-san. He regarded the picture with a troubled expression. That girl went through some terrible things back then. I wonder how her life took such a turn. I just hope that she is at least capable of making her own decisions. The mayor chewed on his pipe. You want that she chose to become a pirate. I want that she is sane and in control of her own actions. Even if she does terrible things, at least she is making her own decisions. The other man sniffed but passed no further comment. The room was covered in blood. One of the targets had been awake and had fought back. There was no room for error. He signaled his team and they converged on him. Kakashi stared at his fractured hand. He had improved somewhat. He could use eating utensils now even if he was a bit slow. Like he did every morning and several times a day, he deliberately flexed his fingers, savoring the pain that jolted as he did that. If there's feeling, there's hope. The flesh is alive, it just needs time to heal. Running a mental checklist, it was clear that he had far to go. He would never fight again, he knew that and was perversely glad, but he wanted to be able to work. He couldn't even help Makino with her simplest chores. He was secretly glad about the arrangement with the books. He wasn't called a genius for nothing, he had an aptitude for numbers and calculations. Makino hated doing her accounts and wasn't very good at them. Kakashi was bored, guilty, desperate for something to do and gifted. It worked out very well for both of them. He had done her takings for the night and was waiting for her to finish up before going to bed. Makino wrung out her cloth for the final time and glanced at the wall. She had framed the bounty posters for both Ace and Luffy, much to the annoyance of the mayor. She didn't see what his problem was. She had framed articles of Garp too, and Dragon as well. She remembered the serious intensity of that older boy when she was young. He was never cruel or unjust to anyone, but he had a sort of gravitas that frightened her. She knew that he would do something big even then, but she had no idea just what. It was showing pride in famous sons of the town after all. The patrons agreed and drank to that, thus winning the argument. She glanced at Luffy's grinning face and sighed. He'll come back, you know. She jumped and turned to Kakashi, his lean figure sitting heavily in a chair by the bar. His handsome face regarded her seriously with a touch of concern over the head of his cane. What do you mean, Kakashi-san? Luffy will be fine, he's more than able to look after himself. I'm not doubting that, but you're allowed to worry, Makino-san. It's normal. When we send them off into the world, we know that they'll do their best and pray that they'll find their way. She lowered her eyes. That's true, I suppose. I'm always glad to hear that they're doing well, but sometimes you just wish that they'll come flying in again demanding something to eat. She made her way out from behind the bar and stood beside him. He smiled cheerfully. I know that feeling all right, but Makino-san, did you know? The end of a quest is in the exact same spot as the beginning. The adventure isn't over until the hero returns home triumphant. That will, she smiled, be quite a party. Well, I for one, I'm already looking forward to it. He stood up and made his way to the stairs while she checked the door and snuffed the lights. The bar usually had a late night, and even later for those that lived there. His father's face smiled sad and gentle across the flames. Mother was probably waiting for him to forgive himself, he mused. Those features, so much like his own, peered through the fluttering firelight. Is it all right, he wondered, to want a different kind of life? As long as it's a life you have chosen for yourself. Sakumo murmured, if it makes you happy then go for it. I don't think we'd have the right to judge you. This war, I know, I don't think that chance will come. It will. After all is said and done you can rest easy and send the younger generation on their way. Father, you better get going, you're late enough as it is. Kakashi. Time to wake up and smell that sea air. It was extremely surprising to see Ace go flying across the deck from a well-placed kick. It was even more surprising that the offender had done so while shouting, "Dynamic entry, what kind of catchphrase was that anyway?" It was probably most surprising that the offender, who while presumably blind, then proceeded to give Whitebeard a thumbs up complete with a logic-defying sparkle on his teeth and reassured the Yonko that Ace was unhurt but he would have to pay for the drinks. He also mentioned youth far too much. Ace immediately jumped up and started shouting at Sasuke. I can't believe you kicked me. Well, clearly that's how I flirt. You're not really my type of teal-ass head. You have no sense of humor. Charcoal breath. You're paying for drinks so pony up the cash. Flame ass. Whitebeard watched in amusement as Ace left the ship with the stranger who promptly decided to turn around and invite everyone else, but particularly Marco because they had a mutual acquaintance, for a long time, no see, party. Whitebeard wondered if he was a relation of red hair. They didn't look anything alike but he partied like him all right. I'm doing well and you? One morning in Fuchsia Village, everyone did a collective spit take when they looked at the paper and saw the news about Eni's lobby. Kakashi had been helped downstairs to sit in a comfortable chair by the fire and talk with the villagers. He tired easily but Dr. Cairn felt it was better that he got as much company as possible. Kakashi moved like an old man, one who had seen his family die before him. The villagers were a cheerful lot and were not of the sort that took pleasure in the suffering of anyone. They welcomed him into their circle easily and chatted as if they had been friends for years. This afternoon, they were celebrating the news of Luffy and his crew. Such a famous pirate coming from their village and what a bounty to boot. One of the men cheerfully showed him the bounty posters of the Mugiwara pirates. Kakashi choked. He spluttered and gasped for air before jabbing his finger at one of the girls. That's my former student, he rasped. I thought she was dead. Makino examined the portrait. Monstrous, Haruno Sakura. 30 million belly. The gray-haired man blinked and shook his head ruefully before laughing. I thought she had died too. I never expected to hear she'd become a pirate. He took the poster off Makino and smiled. Still, I'm glad she's doing well. She suddenly desperately wished that Luffy would come visit and bring Sakura-san with him. Kakashi-san really needed to smile more. Tea with friends. Genma shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Shizune didn't seem to pay any heed to the dirty looks the blonde man was giving him. Her boyfriend chewed on his cigar and snarled silently across the table, letting the former Junin know in no uncertain terms that he did not like him. Genma cursed internally. She just had to get an overprotective, possessive type, didn't she? If he had known it was like this he would have kept on going and not stopped there for anyone. Shizune had introduced him as a former colleague and Genma was positive he could see the killing intent form a visible aura around the carpenter. She left the table to fetch them all drinks from the kitchen. Polly shifted in his seat and extinguished his cigar in the tray. He pulled out another and a box of matches before meeting the other mon's eyes. I even suspect you're up to something and not even Iceberg-san could save you then. He struck up a match and lit his fresh cigar. Genma sighed and bobbed his toothpick. Never again, he vowed. Old friends be damned. Putting up with jealous and overprotective boyfriends was one thing, but he didn't want to flee the wrath of the whole town for upsetting one of their favorite citizens. Even if that citizen was a murderous paranoid chain smoker. Image association. You know, she mused, I've seen this type of fire before. She ran her fingertips across his shoulder as if it was the most fascinating object she had seen in her life. Oh, is that so? Marco turned his attention to her sash, expertly divesting her of it. I don't think you're old enough to have seen the last guy to eat this devil fruit. It doesn't seem likely. She nipped his ear in reprimand. Blue fire, not of a bird but of a demon. He nodded to indicate that she go on and ran his hand up her back, guiding her dress away from her body. A woman I fought when I was younger. She suddenly found his belt fascinating. Much to his delight, a Bakeneko lived inside of her body, one composed of the blue fire of the soul. He hummed and twirled a strand of her hair around his hand. So you think my fire is the color of my soul? She smiled amusedly and pressed her hand to his chest. That color, she murmured, is the fire of in-between. The flame that scorches the land of the river that separates life and death. He hefted her further into his arms as she continued. The Nekomata is of this world and the next, a demon born from the rage of unjust deaths, much like the phoenix and other demons. The phoenix was once worshipped with the Kyubi as an immortal avatar of fire. She slipped her arms around him and let her fingers stroke his spine. Those that are immortal are those that are vibrant and full of life while existing closer to death than anyone else. I assure you, he smirked, I am very much alive. A wicked grin lit up her face and her eyes danced with fire. Show me, she demanded. He complied. An entertaining toy. Kid was bored. A dangerous fact indeed, and all informed individuals in this situation really should make for the hills. But fortunately, for himself anyway, he had a solution to this quandary. After all, one of his favorite pastimes was starting fights in bars. His dream was to have a fight in every bar on the Grand Line, oh yeah, and become the Pirate King. However, even bar fights could fall into a dull routine, so he challenged himself to look for a fight with reason. Just to make things different, essentially, he felt that he needed a legitimate reason to start a fight. Fortunately for the bored supernova, he had several skills, tools and abilities in order to ensure his entertainment and a decent brawl. Remember our conundrum. Starting a fight the same way every time became routine and hence boring. Hyuga, he barked. No mask tonight. She merely nodded in acquiescence and continued on her rounds, leaving some of the newer crewmates baffled. What the hell did that mean? Was the lithe woman sleeping with the captain and it was part of some kinky game, and if so, did that mean that she normally wore the mask all of the time? And if you continued down that line of thought, could you say the same for Killer? It was clear later on when the ship was docked and the crew prepared to hit the pubs. She emerged from the quarters without her customary animal skull. Her hair, for once, was left loose to swish around the back of their thighs gently. Her eyes glowed in the twilight, and it was obvious why some of the dimmer pirates took her for a sea sprite. The officers followed Kid to the largest tavern on the island and took a large table. Hinata took a seat at the bar and ordered a drink. She was immediately approached by several men, and it wasn't long before one grabbed her hand and snarled in her face. This particular man, who was the first mate on a large crew, was unpleasantly unsurprised to find himself facing Eustace, Captain Kid, who gleefully informed him that he was bothering a member of his crew. It wasn't really that Kid needed this particular excuse, but it was just so damned funny to see the lowlifes hop after her and his own crew twitch in annoyance at them. He wanted a fight, sure, but there were other ways to be entertained too. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.